break down the door. The room inside was visible. Only then did Loschek drop his axe. The silence which followed changed the empire. Our killer is the 30-year-old heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Off his face on morphine and champagne. He is riddled with gonorrhea, and he is the kind of man who keeps a skull as a paperweight. And then there is his accomplice and victim, and this is his teenage mistress. She's a party girl, she's a social climber, and she has become infatuated with him to the point of self-destruction. A scandal so fantastically lurid that it makes the travails of our own beloved royal family like nothing very much at all in comparison. This episode is brought to you by the Lloyds 5K house deposit, and this is something that was last seen in 1996.
Yeah, so the 1990s looks now like a lost golden age of prosperity and positivity, doesn't it? Think of the advent of the Blair administration in 1997, all the enthusiasm and excitement that surrounded that, the economic growth of the time, the technological developments, the sort of sense of an endless golden summer where everybody's listening to Blair and Oasis and looking forward to buying their first houses. And that, of course, takes us to mortgages. Now, the good news is that in a nod to the 1990s, Lloyds are offering 5K deposit mortgages to first-time buyers. So search 5K first-time buyer.
1996 average first-time buyer deposits are based on ONS data. Subject to status, your home may be repossessed if you don't keep up repayments, and conditions apply. Count Hoyos and the Prince of Coburg ordered Loschek to break down the door. Out of breath, half crying, Loschek whispered that he had to inform their serene lordships that a lady, the Baroness Mary Vetsera, was staying in his Imperial Highness's room. Coburg and Hoyos recoiled. They retreated to the billiard room. Loschek kept knocking and calling. A kitchen maid began to whimper. Within a minute, the two emerged and repeated their order. Break down the door. Some servant had already brought a wood-chopping axe. Loschek raised it to smash the lock. The lock resisted. Loschek hacked away at the white-painted door panels. The axe crashed. The panels splintered. Ravens fluttered up from the snow outside. The dogs barked and howled to the echoing blows. Loschek hacked out a gash. The gash became a hole. Framed in jagged wood, smoky with blurred candles, dark with the drawn blinds, the room inside was visible. Only then did Loschek drop his axe. The silence which followed changed the empire. So that is the climactic scene from Frederick Norton's great book, A Nervous Splendor, which is a portrait of fin de siècle Vienna at the end of the 1880s. And it is a tremendously gothic account of the most notorious murder-suicide in European history, a scandal so fantastically lurid that it makes the travails of our own beloved royal family, well, like nothing very much at all in comparison. And the context couldn't be more colourful. We're just outside Vienna. The year is 1888. Vienna, of course, at this period, the city of Mahler, of Klimt, the young Freud, busy developing his theories of psychoanalysis, his notions about the sexual etiology of neurosis, and the question of sex and neurosis will not be irrelevant to this story. And Vienna is the capital of an empire that is struggling to cope with forces that in the 20th century will have an absolutely explosive effect. Nationalism, antisemitism, a host of other modern pathologies. But the scene I just described, Dominic, I mean, it does read like something out of a kind of 19th century Gothic thriller, doesn't it? Like something out of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So, hi everybody. The scene is a remote hunting lodge in the woods outside Vienna, and the two principal characters, so I'm going to give the game away right away. Our killer is the 30-year-old heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. He's Crown Prince Rudolf, an idealistic, haggard man. He's off his face on morphine and champagne. He is riddled with gonorrhea, and he is the kind of man who keeps a skull as a paperweight.
I mean, he's another of the many people in history who look like our producer Callum. There's an astonishing number of them. But maybe the interesting thing about this, we did our series on Jack the Ripper, and we poo-pooed the notion that a crown prince could be a killer in that series. But here, there's not much doubt, is there?
There's no doubt whatsoever. So there's Crown Prince Rudolf, and then there is his accomplice and victim. And this is his teenage mistress, Baroness Mary Vetsera, who is a fashionista. She's a party girl. She's a social climber. And she has become infatuated with him to the point of self-destruction. And it's a brilliant, brilliant story. I mean, all through the decades, writers and artists have been drawn to it. There are manga comics, there are plays, there are operas, there's ballet. Kenneth Macmillan's great ballet from the 1970s, a real favourite at the Royal Ballet in London.
Yeah, because it was staged this spring at Covent Garden.
Yes. So it's a fantastic story. And we'll get straight into it. And we'll begin with the time and place, which is a great favourite of the rest is history. The Austro-Hungarian Empire. So worlds of gigantic cakes, even more gigantic moustaches, insanely dapper uniforms, waltzes, nationalism, simmering beneath the surface, the subconscious.
Sexual psychosis.
Exactly. We are here for all of it. Now, to remind listeners, particularly people who didn't hear our series about the build-up to the First World War when the Austro-Hungarian Empire last featured. It's in Central Europe. It's this mosaic of languages and ethnicities. Half of it is ruled from Vienna, half of it from Budapest. There are 13 million German speakers, 10 million Hungarians, 5 million Czechs. There are Poles, Italians, Slovenes, Jews, you name it. And what binds them is their unity to the Habsburg dynasty. So it's a 13th century dynasty, the Habsburgs. Rudolf, of course, is a Habsburg. In his book that you mentioned, his brilliant book, A Nervous Splendor, Frederick Morton calls them manipulative, industrious, strangely modest, inexorable, decent, stodgy, staunch. Drabness was their secret, drabness and patience. And the man who embodies this is Rudolf's father, and that is Emperor Franz Joseph I, a great favourite of the show. So because basically he lived forever.
He's Elisabeth II, isn't he, of 19th century history?
He completely is. And we'll get, because he's the father of the killer, we'll spend a bit of time with him because he's such an important figure in this story. So at this point, although he died in 1916, but at this point, 1888, he is not yet 60. And he was born in 1830 in Schönbrunn Palace, the Austrian kind of Versailles, outside Vienna. And he was really the ultimate Habsburg. If you take the sort of Habsburg spirit, what was that decent, stodgy, staunch, drab?
He's peak Habsburg.
And distilled it in human form. You have this guy. So he's very pious Catholic. He's completely committed to the imperial ideal. He grew up as a little boy with a passion for uniforms and parades and toy soldiers. And that runs all the way through his life. And in the history books, historians tend to kind of laugh at him because historians don't like people like this. He's a sensitive man, Franz Joseph, but perhaps because he's sensitive, he's very stubborn and he's a stickler for order.
Protocol, right? Everything has to be governed by protocol.
People used to joke that when he made love to his wife, he would always be wearing full regimental uniform.
I mean, the ladies love a uniform.
They do. And uniform means a lot to him. There are loads and loads of stories of him losing his temper when people come to court in the wrong uniform. Most famously, a story that there was a junior officer, just a young bloke at a kind of ball or at some function, had the wrong number of decorative buttons on his sleeve. And Franz Joseph said, well, how dare you turn up with the wrong number of buttons? And various other people explained to the emperor that tailors had stopped making these decorative buttons because they were pointless. And Franz Joseph was absolutely crushed. And he said, it's quite wrong. It's monstrous.
Because this is a signal that nothing is stable and all may pass.
Exactly. So just to a thought about our protagonist, Crown Prince Rudolf. So he's growing up with a father who is intensely conservative, who's emotionally very taciturn, who is obsessed with duty and order, and not a man who will show strong feeling to his son, which I think is a factor in explaining how Crown Prince Rudolf gets to where he gets to.
A faint echo of Prince Philip and Prince Charles?
Possibly, yeah. I think there is a slight element of that, actually, in this story.
Prince Philip was always kind of forcing Prince Charles into Spartan activities that he didn't really enjoy.
I think Franz Joseph would have approved of Gordonston as a school, don't you?
Yes.
So Franz Joseph became emperor when he was 18 years old. So it's the chaos of the 1848 revolutions. His uncle, Emperor Ferdinand, who was epileptic, abdicated. And in this moment of great tension and great flux for the Austrian Empire, Franz Joseph was parachuted in as emperor. And he stands, from that moment onwards, he stands for stability, discipline, tradition, and so on. He makes himself the fixed point, which is why your parallel with Elizabeth II, I think, is very well observed. I think they're both monarchs who in an age of change decide to play the part. They decide to become the embodiment of continuity. Now, an emperor needs an empress. And this brings us to Rudolf's mother.
Oh, yes.
So surely the most romantic, certainly the most romantic monarchical figure in Central European history, Elisabeth of Bavaria. Now, people in the English-speaking world may not gauge just how popular she was in Central Europe. She was the focus of an absolutely intense cult, personality cult. Basically, if you think about Princess Diana in the 1980s and 90s, she's that on steroids. Her nickname was Sisi, and she was a sex symbol. She was a fashion leader. She was an influencer. She was the personification of glamour. She was a romantic heroine. She was a sportswoman. For a lot of people, she was basically a saint and a martyr. And her story really is bonkers. So she was born in 1837 into a sort of minor branch of the Bavarian royal family. And her father was called Duke Maximilian, and he was an absolute madman. He was obsessed with circuses, and he didn't give her a proper education because, unusually, he hoped that his daughter would grow up to join the circus.
Run away from a palace and join a circus.
Exactly. So she's only sort of half educated. She's a bit of an autodidact.
Well, do you know, Dominic, I've always found that a very appealing aspect of her. Because she had this enormously long hair.
Yeah, down to her ankles.
Yeah, down to her ankles. And it was so heavy that she would complain that its weight gave her headaches. And so it took her maids kind of 2 or 3 hours every morning to comb it and to brush it out and to adorn it and whatever. And while she's doing it, she sits there learning difficult languages. So she learnt Hungarian. She became hugely popular with Hungarians, as we will find out. And then she learnt ancient Greek. And I had to learn ancient Greek. And I unfortunately didn't have long hair, and I didn't have attendants to comb it. But nevertheless, while I was at my ablutions, I would try and emulate Sisi by learning some regular Greek verbs.
While you were combing your hair?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's impressive.
So she's a role model still to this day, is what I'm saying.
She and Franz Joseph have an incredibly romantic origin story as a couple. So when she was 15, she went with her mother and her older sister, Hélène, Nene she was called, to the spa town of Bad Ischl.
Great to have a spa town.
It is great. And the reason they were going there was they were going to meet Franz Joseph, because the two mothers had agreed, basically, that Franz Joseph would marry Hélène. Franz Joseph was then 23. And his mother, Sophie, as she was called, had picked out Hélène as a sort of German-speaking, Catholic, ideal regal bride, imperial bride. When they met for tea, Hélène was very shy and serious, and she was poor at small talk, as was Franz Joseph.
Yeah, wouldn't it? I mean, he's shy and serious, isn't he?
Exactly. But he was looking for something more. He didn't want another shy and serious person.
He wanted a circus performer.
He did. Sisi was there, and she was only 15, and she was basically there for, she was along for a jaunt. So she was in great form, joking, good-humoured.
Shaking her very long hair.
Exactly. She's a very elegant-looking, sort of innocent teenage girl. And after this, they'd had tea. Franz Joseph's brother said to their mother, he said, "Mama, Francie likes Sisi very much, better than Nene. You will see, he will choose her instead of the elder one." And their mother said, no, he'll do as he's told. I mean, he may be the emperor, but he'll do as I tell him. Anyway, Franz Joseph went to see his mother that evening and said, "It's Sisi or nobody. I'm in love."
I mean, how awful for Hélène.
Right, gutting for Helene. Although the upside for Helene is she didn't have to marry Franz Joseph. So, swings and roundabouts. Anyway, the next day they had a big ball, and Franz Joseph danced with Sisi to the exclusion almost of everybody else. And when servants gave him loads of flowers to give to all his dance partners for the day, he gave them all to Sisi. And people said, oh, well, there's no fighting this. So the next day, which was his birthday, the two mothers said, they got together and they said, fine. Franz Joseph can marry Sisi after all. So a very romantic story. They went for a midnight carriage ride, and he wrapped Sisi up in his military cloak, and he whispered in her ear, I can hardly say how happy I am to be marrying you. And to Franz Joseph, she is a dream. She's his fairy tale princess. And a year later, she arrives in Vienna for the wedding. And there are huge crowds, there's merch, there's an amazing scene. So the Countess of Westmoreland was there to see it happen, to see her arrive. And she described how the boat docked, the emperor ran onto the bridge and embraced her openly. And she said, I can't tell you the effect of the simple natural act. Not only thousands of spectators on the banks burst into prolonged cheers, but many eyes besides mine were wet. She's 1,000 times better than her portraits. None of them give an idea of her freshness, her air of candor and gentleness and intelligence. So this sounds great, right? This sounds fantastic. But the reality is a little bit different. It's a fairy tale. We're not unfamiliar with this, of course, in modern British history. A fairy tale royal wedding that doesn't turn out quite as happily as you would think. So in his great book on the Habsburgs, Andrew Wheatcroft, British historian, says, behind the fairy tale image, the reality was a gauche and rather difficult girl, flattered yet terrified by his overwhelming passion. And this is absolutely right. Sisi said herself, why me? I'm so young. I'm so unimportant. I'll try to keep him happy, but will it be enough? She is absolutely crippled by self-consciousness. She doesn't get on with Franz Joseph's mother.
No, the mother's awful, isn't she? And when she has children, they're always taking the children away and not letting her have anything to do with them.
Exactly. Constantly squabbling. The worst kind of mother-in-law, basically. But in Sisi, I think partly because she's been brought up to be in the circus, she never quite grows up. So she's always a little bit of a sort of a spoiled child. She's very moody. She is brooding. She is stubborn. These are qualities that she will pass on to her son, Rudolf.
I mean, it helps, presumably, that she's incredibly beautiful and glamorous. Because if you're moody and beautiful and glamorous, then it comes to seem part of the package, rather than just being annoying.
Of course. Exactly right. Exactly. So they have two girls almost straight away, Sophie and Gisela. But Sophie died of scarlet fever when she was 2. And I think this was probably for Sisi, who was only 20 at the time, a shattering moment from which she probably never really recovered, to be quite honest. Anyway, a year later, 1858, 21st of August, 1858, she has a son. And this, of course, is giving Franz Joseph what he wants, a male heir. And this is our protagonist, our killer, Crown Prince Rudolf. And he was named after Rudolf I, who was the first Habsburg to be king of the Romans, basically Holy Roman Emperor. And that name tells a story because at this point in time, the 1850s, 1860s, the Habsburgs, all the rage is what's called historicism. So they are looking back constantly to try to find some historical legitimacy for their embattled dynasty and their state. And Rudolf is the focus for enormous expectation right from day one. So they had a big gala at the Court Theatre in Vienna to celebrate his birth. And they had an actress, I thought this would appeal to you, Tom, an actress playing the part of Cleo, the muse of history, who has a golden tablet on stage and she writes his name and the date of his birth on the tablet. And then she says to the audience, but the rest of the tablet I leave empty. There must be room for his deeds, and I divine greatness, which I shall record here yet.
It's like something from a Greek myth or a fairy tale, isn't it? Because, of course, his deeds will indeed be written down in the annals of history, but not quite as his parents would hope.
No, exactly. So like his father, Rudolf is brought up, effectively he's trained to be a soldier because the army is the supreme Habsburg institution.
I mean, Dominic, you say he's raised up. The day after his birth, he is appointed the colonel of an infantry regiment and given the Order of the Golden Fleece, which regular listeners may remember Edward Habsburg, who is a member of the Habsburg, I think the only Habsburg we've had on the show, and who did a whole episode about the Habsburgs. And he promised me that I would join the Order of the Golden Fleece, a promise he hasn't yet delivered. And also, young Rudolf, he got his first military uniform when he was 2.
That does not surprise me. So when he was 6, he was handed over to a general to tutor him. And this bloke was an absolutely monstrous kind of military taskmaster. So he would wake the 6-year-old Rudolf up by shooting a pistol over his head, like right by his ear.
I mean, this is very Prince Philip, isn't it, with Prince Charles?
Basically waterboard him, like to prepare him for the rigors of leadership. And he'd also make him, this is a mad detail, he would make him sleep at night in the zoo.
What, in a cage? With lions?
I don't know. I just saw this detail and I wrote it down in the notes. I would love to have time to research this in more detail. The zoo, the sleeping in the zoo,
in the monkey house.
Exactly, in the reptile enclosure or something. Anyway, Rudolf was completely traumatized by this, and basically after 2 years of this, a courtier mentioned to his mother that this was happening, and she complained.
Well, he's sleeping with snakes.
Yeah, she complained, and the general was fired. But it obviously, I mean, you don't have to be a great psychoanalyst. You don't have to be Sigmund
don't have to be Freud.
This would probably really screw you up. Anyway, so it also tells you something about Cece's parenting. The fact that it's taken 2 years to notice that her son is sleeping in the lion enclosure. So she's not a terribly interested parent. I think that's reasonable to say. She's in fact so self-absorbed with her hair and her sort of brooding and whatnot that she doesn't really have time for her children. And when Rudolf was 2, she said to Franz Joseph, she said, I need to go to Madeira for my health. I need to go immediately. And Franz Joseph said, oh my God, the doctors I'll get the doctors to have a look at you. The doctors reported there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. And she said, no, I'm terribly ill. I absolutely must go to Madeira. Why, we don't know. They might have had a row, or I think quite possibly she's suffering extreme postnatal depression. But anyway, off she went to Madeira. She spent the whole winter there. Then she came back to Vienna for a little bit. And then she said to Franz Joseph, I need to leave again. I need to go to Corfu now. And then she went to Corfu.
And she loves Corfu, doesn't she?
And she absolutely adored Corfu.
She builds the Achilleon.
Yes, exactly.
Which we've talked about.
And Franz Joseph went to visit her in Corfu and said, how are you getting on? Are you feeling better? She said, not really. I'll probably stay here for a while.
Yeah, for a few weeks, maybe months, maybe years.
Yeah. And this is basically the story of the next few decades. She's traveling constantly.
She goes to England a lot, doesn't she? Goes fox hunting.
In Northamptonshire, bizarrely. She likes going to Northamptonshire. She also likes hanging out in Ireland and again going hunting and sort of hanging out with the Anglo-Irish aristocracy. And then occasionally she'll go into Monte Carlo to play the tables in the casino.
I mean, I think if I was a beautiful 19th century empress, that is what I would do.
Yeah, right. You would go to Monte Carlo and Corfu.
I'd play the tables. I'd go fox hunting in England. I'd hang out in Corfu. I'd be moody.
Do you know what? Actually, the parallels are uncanny. Like you.
Yeah.
As with you, her clothing, her weight, her appearance is discussed in the gossip columns of the world.
Well, she's very tall, isn't she? Unusually tall and madly thin. So her waist is 16 inches. So the corsets are vice-like. And she never weighs more than 110 pounds ever. And if she does, then she goes on these kind of massive, well, she basically refused to eat. And she goes to a gym. So she's one of the earliest women in European history regularly to go to a gym. And she has an absolute horror of fat women. And she raises her children to regard them with dread and terror. And one occasion she takes her young daughter to London to meet Queen Victoria. And the poor girl has never seen a fat woman before. So when she sees Queen Victoria, she wets herself out of terror.
Biographers had this great battle about whether or not she was anorexic or bulimic or something.
Oh, I think she was. Because occasionally she'd go off and eat cake.
They would describe her eating enormous meals and then somehow miraculously being incredibly thin.
And she would never eat meat, would she? She'd have beefsteaks kind of squeezed and the blood would drip out and then she'd have it with watery soup.
She probably suffers very badly from some form of mental health issue, such as depression. And that would explain why she often seems so listless, so kind of blank, so self-destructively reckless when she's hunting. People would say, she's an incredible huntswoman, but one day she's going to fall off and break her neck and all of this.
And the whole corsetry thing. I mean, it's so extreme as to be almost fetishistic.
Exactly. She's punishing herself, effectively. Now, while she's gone, Franz Joseph, he has affairs with these sort of very boring, discreet, middle-class women who can be relied upon to keep quiet. And his most celebrated relationship is with an actress at the court theatre called Katharina Schratt. And that was basically set up for him by his wife. He'd long admired this actress, and Cece said, well, as a present to you, I'll get her portrait painted, and maybe you'd like to meet her. And she introduces them, and they have this very close relationship. So Katharina Schratt she was basically his confidant, and she was very jolly, and she was a good listener. She would make him cakes. She would cook goulash for him, and she would tell him all the backstage gossip. And Cece was very happy with this. She encouraged it, and she would sometimes the three of them would hang out together.
Did they get on? Cece and Katharina?
I think it's because Cece had arranged it because she knew this actress was no conceivable threat to her.
Yeah, I mean, Cece's not a goulash cooker, I imagine.
No, she's not going to make you cakes and tell you great banter about, actors. I mean, of course, if she joined a circus, as was intended, it would have been a very different story. But the person that Franz Joseph loves is always clearly Cece. He's got her portrait in his study with her hair down to her ankles. He's always sending her presents in Corfu. He writes her sweet letters all the time. He always calls her my dear, dear angel. He signs himself, your little man. Or he literally calls himself your mannequin because she's much taller than he is. And I think there's something quite sad about his story. So he's this kind of lonely emperor, devoted to his people. He gets up at 5 o'clock every morning from his iron bedstead to do his paperwork. He has his lunch on his own of boiled beef, always the same lunch. Then he goes out to meet his people. He always says exactly the same thing. I mean, even Queen Elizabeth II didn't do this. He always says, it was at the end of every event, it was very nice, I enjoyed it. And then he goes home and then he writes letters to his runaway wife. So that's his story. Now, there is one respect in which Cece really helps him out, because basically in the first 20 years of his reign, everything has gone wrong for him and for Austria. They were beaten by the French and Piedmont, the Italians, Solferino in 1859. That lost Lombardy, northern Italy for Austria, paved the way for Italian unification. And he basically had to grant a kind of constitution and a parliament at home to make up for this. And then 7 years later, he loses another war to Bismarck's Prussia. Basically, it takes 7 weeks. There's a catastrophic defeat for the Austrians at the Battle of Königgrätz. And after this, the Austrians are driven out of the German-speaking world, which is now free to unite under Prussian leadership to become Germany. And that is a devastating moment for Austria and for Franz Joseph. Basically, he's been emperor for 20 years. Everything he's touched has turned to ashes. He's lost Italy. He's lost Germany. Austria has been basically forced back into the Balkans. And as a reaction to this latest defeat, it looks like his empire might fall apart because the Hungarians, who are, basically half the empire and have rebelled already in 1848, they're now questioning the legitimacy of the entire enterprise. They're not paying their taxes. There's a huge political crisis. It looks as though the whole thing's going to fall apart. Everybody in Vienna hates the Hungarians and says they're terrible people, except one. And you've already mentioned this, Tom.
And that's Cece. She's been busy learning Hungarian while having her hair done.
She has. So she had gone to Budapest a few years earlier and she absolutely loved it. And she had this sort of fantasy of Hungary, a land of gypsy fiddlers, dancing bears, counts with massive moustaches, all of this. She loves
Ruritania,
all this.
Basically. It's the Ruritanian quality.
Completely. She's incredibly popular in Budapest. And she says to Franz Joseph, look, I can play a role as an intermediary with the Hungarians. And she introduces him to these nationalist leaders, Count Andrassy and Ferenc Deák, who are the big Hungarian sort of bigwigs. She passes letters between them. She encourages her husband to be, flexible and to, look for solutions and stuff. And the result of this is what's called the Compromise of 1867, which is a huge moment in Central European history. Because what it does is it divides the Austrian Empire into two. There's a Hungarian half that will be ruled from Budapest, and that includes Transylvania and includes inland Croatia. And then there's an Austrian half ruled from Vienna that includes what's now the Czech Republic, so Bohemia, Moravia, includes Galicia and Poland and Ukraine, includes Slovenia and so on and so forth. And in Vienna, Franz Joseph rules as Emperor of Austria, and in Budapest, he rules as King of Hungary. And to mark the occasion in Budapest, he and Sisi are given a coronation, a new coronation. She's the first Hungarian queen to be crowned with the Holy Crown of St. Stephen, to be given the scepter and the orb. And the Hungarians absolutely love her. They give her a palace. Whenever she goes, she wears Hungarian national dress. As you said, she speaks Hungarian, all of this. So it looks like everything's gone well, but with the Habsburgs in this period, there's always some sort of amusing calamity just round the corner.
The next calamity, well, it's not exactly amusing, is it? But it's eccentric.
It's an eccentric calamity. And we've done this on the show, haven't we, with Edward Shawcross. This was the story of Maximilian Habsburg, who had gone off to become Emperor of Mexico. It's all gone terribly wrong for him. He's Franz Joseph's brother. And he ends up being cornered in Querétaro in Mexico and shot by a firing squad. And Franz Joseph's reaction is so Franz Joseph. He's told, your brother's been shot by a firing squad. And he says, what a shame. He was an excellent huntsman, and we will miss him at our next shoot. However, and I quote, we may still look forward to good sport, which I think is an admirably sanguine way to mark your brother's demise.
As an Englishman, you're an admirer of a stiff upper lip. So one has to respect that.
Exactly. So, the net result of all this, we're now into the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. The upside is it keeps the empire going. The downside is it basically institutionalizes constant squabbling between the Austrian and Hungarian halves of the empire about tariffs, and budgets, and the army and things like this. And it also kind of institutionalizes an instability at the heart of the empire. The Hungarians have had special treatment now. There are lots of other groups, Slovaks, Romanians, Croats and stuff, who are now being ruled from Budapest with an iron fist by the Hungarians. And they don't like this at all.
They're resentful. They'd rather have the Austrians.
The Austrians are a bit softer on their minorities than the Hungarians are, because the Hungarians are a bit more insecure, I think. So it's a great tragedy in some ways for the Austro-Hungarians. But the advent of proper parliamentary politics coincides with effectively the invention of national identities. So there's a great book on the Habsburgs by Martin Rady. And he has this whole thing about how this is the age when people are drawing up censuses, they're drawing national maps, ethnographic museums are inventing kind of unbroken histories, towns are putting up statues of national heroes. Basically, they're inventing fixed national identities where previously they were fluid. And in areas where the people are overlapping, you get different kind of linguistic groups who will set up competing, and I quote, choirs, fire brigades, athletics clubs, savings banks, veterans associations, schools, and so on and so forth. So they're basically, you might never have thought, am I a Hungarian, am I Romanian or whatever, but now people are forcing you to choose, and those identities are becoming kind of locked in. And these sort of different groups are, once they're formed, they're fighting for kind of power and influence within this new system. Now, the bloke who is brilliant at manipulating all this is the Austrian Prime Minister. He's called Count Eduard Taaffe. He's of Irish descent, interestingly. The Irish landowners, they'd moved to Moravia in the Czech Republic, and they'd settled there, done very well. And he had been Franz Joseph's childhood friend. And he creates a coalition, this guy Taaffe, of sort of Catholic clericals, German landowners, Czech nationalists, Polish nationalists, and it's called the Iron Ring, his coalition. And he was very, very sort of suave and self-knowing. He said of his own strategy, he said, my policy is muddling through. I'd like to keep all the nationalities of the monarchy in a state of balanced and well-modulated discontent.
Disappointed he didn't give that in an Irish accent.
That's bonus content. That's for club members, the Irish accent. Now, one of the things that he has to do as part of this is to keep the Czechs happy. So he basically allows junior civil servants in Bohemia and Moravia to use Czech rather than German. And that creates a backlash from some of the German speakers. And the German speakers say, what? You're allowing the Czechs to use Czech? What are you giving away? You know, our supremacy within the empire to these kind of jumped up Slavs. And some of the German speakers say, look, Germany is brilliant. Germany's just been created under Bismarck. It's very modern. It's very dynamic, very militaristic. What are we hanging around for with like these people stuffing themselves with cake and talking to Slavs? Austria-Hungary is clearly destined for the scrap heap. Our future lies in a greater Germany. And so in the 1880s, which is the decade leading up to the Mayerling Incident, you have the growth of this very noisy, aggressive, pan-German movement that is bitterly opposed to what they see as the sort of woke multiculturalism of the Habsburgs and would much prefer union with Berlin. And their spokesman is a guy called Georg von Schönerer, who is the leader of this tiny sort of German nationalist party, and he is a pioneer of extremist, anti-Semitic nationalism.
We kind of know where this is going to lead.
We do indeed, because Schönerer, he wants to change the calendar, dating all years from the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest.
Yeah, the defeat of Augustus's 3 legions.
Exactly so. Because he says that was the last point, basically, when Germany, the German-speaking world, was free from the taint of kind of bourgeois Jewish capitalism. And we need to get back to that.
And he doesn't like Christian festivals, does he? Because they're Jewish.
Exactly. Get rid of Christmas and replace it with something called Julfest. And the Austrians greet each other by saying Grüß Gott. He says, get rid of that. Why don't we say Heil?
Yeah, why not? Could really catch on.
So you can see, right, where all this is leading, because, of course, in a couple of decades, a certain Adolf Hitler will be hanging around in Vienna and imbibing a lot of this. Anyway, back to Mayerling. That's the context. So let's now concentrate. Let's narrow the focus to Vienna in August 1888. On the 18th of August, Franz Joseph is due to celebrate his birthday. It actually pours with rain, so it's postponed for a couple of days. And that means that it coincides with what's scheduled for the 20th, which is this guy, Georg von Schönerer, the pan-German extreme nationalist, is due to report to the Landesgerichtsstraße prison because he's been sentenced to 3 months in jail for leading an attack on a Jewish-owned newspaper. And the very next day, the 21st, our protagonist, our killer, Crown Prince Rudolf, is due to mark his own birthday. It's his 30th birthday, and although none of them know it, it is also going to be his last, because something is very, very seriously wrong with Crown Prince Rudolf.
Are we going to find out what is wrong after the break?
Definitely.
Don't miss it then.
This episode is brought to you by National Geographic. Tom, we're familiar, aren't we, with what happened in Pompeii when Vesuvius exploded?
We absolutely are. So AD 79, Vesuvius blows its top. Debris rains down on Pompeii. It ends with a pyroclastic flow, which essentially entombs the city, entombs everyone left living there. And it lay there waiting to be brought to light centuries and centuries later.
Now, in Pompeii Out of Time with Tom Hiddleston, Hiddleston will guide you between past and present. He will uncover the real stories of the people who lived through one of history's most notorious disasters.
It is a cinematic masterpiece from the makers of Loki, and it brings the ancient world vividly to life.
Watch Pompeii Out of Time with Tom Hiddleston, Thursday at 8 p.m. on National Geographic.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Rest is History, and to the story of one of the great royal scandals of Central European history, and indeed I would go so far as to say European history full stop. And it is the late summer of 1888. We're at the heart of the Austro-Hungarian imperial capital, Vienna, a city of almost 1.5 million people. And Dominic, there is a case for saying that this is the heartbeat of what will become modern civilization, isn't it?
Totally. So we already mentioned, Mahler, Klimt and so on. We'll come back to them in a second. Vienna has been completely transformed in the previous 30 years. So just to give people who haven't been to Vienna a sense of our stage set, if you like, and actually that's quite a good phrase to use of Vienna. Franz Joseph's builders in the last 30 years have ripped down the old city fortifications, and they've made way. The centerpiece of their sort of city planning project is probably at the time the most famous boulevard in the world, which is the Ringstrasse. You go there today, it's still this kind of breathtaking spectacle. These magnificent buildings, the Opera House, the Court Theatre, the Parliament, the City Hall, Museum of Natural History, the Art Museum, enormous buildings around this kind of circular I mean, you might call it a ring road if you were being dismissive. And their design tells you something about the Habsburg project in the 19th century. Because the very first buildings on the ring were designed, they were historicists. So each building was sort of designed in a different historical style to reflect its function. So the city hall would be one style, the parliament another. And basically they were saying, well, the Habsburgs are the heirs to all historical styles. But then by the 1880s, when they're finishing off the Ringstrasse, Franz Joseph's architects had settled on just one style, which was neo-Baroque. And the reason they settled on this, which is quite sort of wedding cakey.
Kind of florid paintings, isn't it? And all of that.
Exactly. And the reason they did that is because at the time, in Bismarck's Germany, neoclassical was all the rage, which is kind of slightly colder and more austere. And the Viennese wanted to say, oh, we're not like the Germans with their cold classicism. We're more fun. We're more, a little bit more flowery.
But, I mean, that's not entirely a sensible policy, is it? Because if you've got a serious architecture and you've got a kind of wedding cake architecture, which one is, going to have the most potent empire?
Well, I suppose so. Although I quite like that Habsburg style.
Yeah, I like it, but it doesn't make me think these are going to be the master race.
It makes me think there'll be excellent composers.
Great composers, great cake, interesting theories about sexuality, totally. But an ability to conquer much of Eastern Europe, I think probably not.
Probably not, yeah. They roll it out all across the empire. So if you go now, even today, to Trieste, to Lviv, to Krakow, to Prague, wherever, you can see this sort of Habsburg architecture is very recognizable. Now, I called it a stage set, and this sense that it's a sort of Baroque stage set is probably a bit misleading because, as you said, this is the city of psychoanalysis. It's the city of the future in lots of ways. So that summer, 1888, there were the first long-distance telephone calls in Central Europe. They're from Vienna to the suburb of Baden, so it's just outside Vienna, so it's not that long distance. And you're limited to 10 minutes, but people are very excited by this.
I would like more cake.
Well, actually, what it is, the greetings that people gave, the sort of, Frau, Herr Doctor, whatever, took so long that you basically only gave you like 2 minutes at the end of the call. Anyway, if you went to the Prater amusement parks, if you've seen the film The Third Man, the kind of Ferris wheel, and Orson Welles, if you go to the Prater amusement park, people would go there and they would buy themselves electric shocks. There was like an electric shock machine, and there were safety regulations to stop people electrocuting themselves, but swells from the sort of aristocratic bits of Vienna would basically bribe the people running the machine to give them bigger and bigger shocks, and they were being carted off all the time to hospital ambulances because they'd electrocuted themselves.
Right, so aristocratic self-harm, bit of a theme.
It's a theme. Now, we mentioned this book by Frederick Morton, A Nervous Splendor, and he sort of, zeroes in on a few characters. So you've got Gustav Klimt, who is painting the new court theatre. He's painting a ceiling panel called The Chariot of Thespis. You have Mahler, who's about to move from Vienna to Budapest to run the opera in Budapest. You have Freud, who then is in his early 30s. He's a nerve doctor, but he's just beginning work on the theories of the sort of subconscious. And it's interesting that two of these names, so Mahler and Freud, are Jewish. And actually, there's lots of Jewish influence in fin de siècle Vienna. So there's Wittgenstein, there's Schoenberg, there is Arthur Schnitzler, the great writer, and so on. And that reflects a bigger story because the Jewish population of Vienna in the last 20 years has risen from 40,000 to well over 100,000, about 120,000. Often these are people who've come from Galicia, kind of Poland, Ukraine, on the newly built railways. And they now have legal equality, which they've only had since 1867. And they flood into the professions. So about 60% of Vienna's doctors are Jewish. About half of the lawyers, they're very prominent in art and in publishing and whatnot. And this, of course, means that they're very convenient and easy scapegoats for people like Georg von Schönerer, who can point to them and say, this is why the empire is going wrong, because we've allowed all these people to come to the capital and to play important parts in the cultural, intellectual life of the capital. Now, there's one man that becomes associated with this Jewish presence, and he's a man who hates Schönerer and who hates the pan-German movement and has a lot of Jewish friends. And this is our protagonist, This is Crown Prince Rudolf. So this is the man who was born to be Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary, King of Bohemia, Dalmatia, Transylvania, blah, 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 all of this.
So basically, his military education has made him kind of woke.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. So we were talking before the break about he slept in the zoo and been woken by pistol shots. And as time goes on, when he enters his teens, it's obvious that he's very much his mother's son, Cece's son. So he is like her. He is restless. He's brooding. He's very introverted. We actually have some of his teenage jottings when he was about 15.
Yeah, shall I read them?
Yeah, why don't you read them in your best Austrian accent?
The kingdom still stands, a mighty ruin, continuing from one day to the next, but doomed finally to fall. For centuries it has endured, and so long as the people allowed themselves to be led blindly, it was good. But now its task is at an end, all men are free, and the next storm will sweep away this ruin.
So he's not very optimistic about his own inheritance. And you might say, well, he's a sort of typical teenager, a bit miserable, a bit sort of downcast and depressive and whatnot. But I think there's more to this than your usual teenage woes. So we've got another quotation, Tom, I think.
Thoughts of every kind race endlessly through my head. All is confusion. My brain sees all day. No sooner has one thought gone than another takes its place. Each one compels me. Each one says something different. Now gay and cheerful. Now raven black with rage. I fight them and struggle with them. And out of it all the truth at last will come.
He's not a bundle of laughs, I think it's true to say. So when he was 21, his father arranged a marriage for him. And he arranged a marriage to Princess Stephanie.
Was she a jolly, fun-loving bride?
She's not a funster. She's a good person, I think, Stephanie. She's quite decent and good-natured.
I mean, considering her father...
Her father is one of the worst people we've ever had on the show. Her father is King Leopold of Belgium.
As in Congo.
Yeah. So she's got the worst father in the world, and she's been condemned to marry Crown Prince Rudolf. And actually, the story of their wedding and the wedding night is awful. She arrives in Vienna when she's 16 years old, but they have to postpone the marriage because it is discovered that her periods have not yet started. So she is then sent back home for a few months to Belgium, which is humiliating.
That's not remotely embarrassing for a 16-year-old.
Right, but it gets worse. She's sent back home. Basically, you can come back once you've started menstruating. She comes back to Vienna. They get married. And then later in life, she wrote a memoir of their wedding night. And I'll read it. It's as follows. What a night. What torments, what horror. I had not the ghost of a notion of what lay before me, but had been led to the altar as an ignorant child. My illusions, my youthful dreams were shattered. I thought I should die of my disillusionment.
Is this a kind of John Ruskin reaction? I mean, what's going on there?
We don't know. I think what torments, what horror suggests she has not enjoyed it. Well, I mean, she's obviously not enjoyed herself. And I don't think it's that Rudolf has disappointed her by just turning to the wall and going to sleep. I mean, you wouldn't write what torment, would you?
No, but is he kind of getting up to sinister sex games?
I just don't know. I mean, Tom, clearly you're thinking about this. I don't want to accuse you of overthinking this extremely gory scene.
Well, but it matters, doesn't it? Because if Rudolf is in the habit of, I mean, as we will see, he's very, very sexually driven.
Yeah.
And he's also very haunted by fantasies of violence and death. I think it's legitimate to say, well, what was he perpetrating on his wedding night?
I don't know. On your wedding night with like a 16-year-old? I mean, it's poor from him, isn't it? Anyway, they actually did have a daughter called Elisabeth Marie. We don't have time to talk about her particularly, but she had an incredible life. So their daughter became a socialist in the 1920s, socialist activist, and was called the Red Archduchess.
God, so even woker than her father.
Even woker. The Nazis sent her to Dachau, and she lived an extreme age and died in 1963. Same year as John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, the year of Beatlemania.
She lived long enough to watch TV footage of people screaming at the London Palladium or something at the Beatles. Incredible. Anyway, the marriage was not a success. Rudolf was very dissolute. He's a good-looking man, I think. You compared him with Callum, our producer, so Callum will be pleased by that. Queen Victoria was a big fan of his. She gave him the Garter when he came to England and used to tickle him, which is slightly weird and messes with your sense of Queen Victoria, I suppose.
Well, you say that because Queen Victoria's son, so the future Edward VII, Bertie, the Prince of Wales, I mean, he is a notorious Lothario, and he's incredibly impressed. So he said of Rudolf, for a young man of his age, it is surprising how much he knows about sexual matters. There is nothing I could teach him. And that's when Rudolf was 19.
Would you want Edward VII to be your instructor? I mean...
Well, Rudolf likes the future Edward VII.
They love each other. Well, this will be coming up in the rest of this episode, exactly so.
He's a kind of jolly father figure, isn't he? So a contrast to his father, and also to another member of the German-speaking royalty who will be coming to in due course.
Yeah, I can't wait for him to appear on the show. So Rudolf's favourite mistress was a woman called Mitzi Kaspar, who came from Graz. It was said that she had worked as a prostitute in Madame Wolf's Vienna brothel. I don't know how true this is. She becomes very close to Rudolf. She becomes his great confidant. But she's only one of many lovers. And it's generally accepted, I think, that by the late 1880s, Rudolf probably had severe gonorrhea. And that he passed this on to Stephanie, his wife, which meant that she could not have more children. And basically the fact that they've both got the sexually transmitted disease doesn't greatly add to the harmony of the household.
No.
And by the late 1880s, there's a lot of rumour in Vienna that Rudolf is looking to have the marriage annulled in some way. Personally, I don't think they were going to do that, because I think that would have been a very difficult thing for a family like the Habsburgs to accept.
Can I just ask what Rudolf's religious faith is? I mean, if he's going to go on and commit suicide and murder, that's not very Catholic behaviour.
I think it is skin deep at best, I would guess. I don't think it's his bag at all. He never seems to talk about God, particularly in his letters and in his sort of jottings, which we'll come to. So before the break, we got to his birthday, which was the 21st of August, 1888. And he celebrated that. That's when he turns 30. At his castle, which is called Laxenburg in the Vienna woods. And Stephanie was there, his wife, and their daughter Elisabeth, who was only, I think she was 4 or so. But his parents didn't go. They just sent telegrams, and that tells you, about their very sort of chilly, formal relationship. And Rudolf, I mean, this is where Callum, our producer, may object to the comparison. Rudolf had just shaved his beard. Callum still has his beard.
Exactly. That's the point. That's the lesson that Callum has to learn. And also he has to learn not to get gonorrhea, which I think is a valuable lesson for any young producer.
Yeah. Rudolf was very haggard. He seems constantly exhausted, which is actually a symptom of gonorrhea. He has this cough that he can't get rid of, and he's necking morphine to deal with the cough. And he feels, in private, in public he gives nothing away, but in private, Rudolf clearly feels he feels useless. He feels there's no point to his life. Actually, he has very strong political views. He would love to see Austria become more modern. He was very interested in electricity. We mentioned the electric shocks and the Prater Park. He still believes very much in the empire and the Habsburg ideal. He's very keen on the army. He wrote to his friend, who was a liberal newspaper editor called Maurice Seps, and he said, "The army is the single central thread which in this chaos still stands for the empire." He thought that the empire needed radical change. So he writes anonymously saying that we should change into a kind of United States of Europe, a kind of federation. He is always writing to this guy, Seps, his friend, and saying, that we're suffering from a sickness. We should have a purge, and a cleaner, better Europe will emerge from this. Interestingly, I mean, this sounds like very kind of, radical late 19th century, early 20th century rhetoric. But one big contrast, as I've already said, he's very keen on the Jews of the empire, because he's got a lot of very close Jewish friends. And actually, this newspaper editor, Seps, is Jewish. And that makes Rudolf a hate figure for Schönerer and the Pan-Germans. They say he's a puppet of Jewish capitalism and all this.
So aside from the whole killing his mistress and shooting himself angle, he might actually have made quite a good fist of being an emperor. And the fate of Middle Europe might have been slightly... Well, we'll discuss this, I guess.
I think if you're brooding all the time in a very slightly weird incel... I mean, he's the opposite of an incel, actually. But he's a man who would spend a lot of time on YouTube watching dark web material.
Yes, but because he's not an emperor. But if he was an emperor, perhaps he would have... I don't know. I'm clutching at straws here.
I'll tell you what would have completely recast the map of Europe if he'd been emperor. He was not a fan of Austria's chief ally. the Germans. He's not a fan of the Germans.
He prefers France, doesn't he? And he also prefers Britain. He likes its constitutional monarchy.
He does. And he likes visiting Britain. And of course, he likes Queen Victoria. He likes the future Edward VII. But there's one man in Europe whom he despises more than any other.
Who might this man be?
A man who lives rent-free in Rudolf's head. A man who has just succeeded to the throne of Germany. It is perhaps the ultimate friend of the rest is history. The bounder, braggart, general oaf, Kaiser Wilhelm II. So they're cousins, and they're almost exactly the same age. I think Rudolf is 5 months older than Wilhelm. And Rudolf absolutely despises Wilhelm. He hates him. And when Wilhelm became Emperor of Germany, Rudolf was appalled, and he wrote to his friend Maurice Seps. He said, "By the grace of God, he is dumb of the Kaiser, but he considers himself the greatest genius. I imagine that in a few years he will bring Hohenzollern Germany to the pass it deserves." And he is not wrong. So Crown Prince Rudolf has all these ideas in his head, but he can't tell anyone. He has to bottle them up because his father doesn't give him anything to do. In fact, the only thing his father lets him do, I mean, I quite admire this. I like this, and I'd actually love to get hold of this. His big passion project is a massive encyclopedia of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So when I say massive, it took 16 years to compile it. It was 24 volumes. It had 400 contributors, and it was 12,000 pages long. And it basically goes through every part of the empire, its history, its geography, its architecture, its flora and fauna, all of this. The nickname for it, because he was the sponsor, it was called the Crown Prince Work, the Crown Prince Werk. And he does this, so he's doing his encyclopedia, and he also writes anonymous articles for liberal newspapers. And he will send them in via servants, and they will always be printed by his friends in the liberal press. And they're usually either arguing for reform of the empire or slacking off the Germans. So when he turns 30, he feels very miserable. He thinks my life's been wasted. And he writes to his mate, Maurice Seps. Do you want to read it? And don't forget, he's not a teenager at this point, so it's not a broken voice.
The age of 30 marks a dividing point in life, and one that isn't very pleasant. Much time has passed, spent more or less usefully, but devoid of real action and success. We live in a slow, rotten time. Who knows how long this will continue? Every passing year makes me older, less keen, less fit. So unlike his mother, he's not keeping up with the gym.
He's not here. I think he's, to use the expression that surely his friend, the Prince of Wales, would have used, he feels very seedy. And he spends a lot of his time retreating he's got a new bolt hole, a hunting lodge in the Vienna woods called Mayerling. And he will go there with his aristocratic mates. They go shooting in the daytime, and then in the evening they drink champagne laced with cognac and morphine, in his case, and they sort of set the world to rights and abuse the Kaiser.
I wonder what champagne and laced with cognac and morphine would be like.
I think it sounds tremendous, actually.
That sounds quite fun, doesn't it?
At the next Rest is History scheduling meeting,
we could have that.
We should order champagne laced with cognac.
We could find a hunting lodge. Get in a bit of hunting. Get out the morphine and the cognac.
Yeah, you can't see this, Tom, but Aaliyah is recording with me. She's absolutely crying with laughter at the thought of this hunting lodge and the champagne and cognac. You can take the girl out of Germany, but you can't take Germany out of the girl. So, this is the moment, just after his 30th birthday, when Crown Prince Rudolf meets the woman who will, I was about to say, change his life.
Yes.
I mean, this will change both their lives in quite a dramatic way. And this is Mary Vetsera. So who is she? So the Vetseras are a recently ennobled family. They're kind of parvenus. Her father was a diplomat who was ennobled by Franz Joseph. Her mother came from a Greek financial family from Constantinople called the Baltazis. And the Baltazis are relentless social climbers. So her uncles are always sort of hanging around at the race course in sort of excessively shiny silk top hats or something. And they're always trying to get invitations to court via Katharina Schratt, Franz Joseph's kind of muse. And Franz Joseph actually said to her, stay away from those Baltazzi brothers. Their reputation is not entirely correct. So she was born Marie, but she called herself Mary because unusually in world history, it was seen as cool to have an English-style name. So that's very nice. And her mother was very ambitious for her, and she went to a convent school for noblemen's daughters. Her father had died in 1887, so that was the year she turned 16. Now, at this point, when her father died, she already had quite a racy reputation. I have to say, if you Google her, I don't want to sound ungallant, but she doesn't leap out of the photograph as a great beauty. However, she's a great party girl. So she's a girl who will, if you have a party in Vienna, she will come dressed as a sexy chambermaid.
Kind of French maid, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And she's a massive social climber like her mother was. So the Duke of Braganza set his cap at her, but she said, not interested, not good enough. And the reason is she has set her sights on Crown Prince Rudolf. Now, her family has fallen because her mother had tried to seduce Rudolf, I think to no effect 10 years earlier. But now Mary wants to have a go, and she is absolutely infatuated with him. So she told her maid, he is mine. He may not even know I exist, but he is mine. I feel it in my heart. So it's a very sort of teenage infatuation. Anyway, in the summer of 1888, she went off to England. And she comes back from England. She's 17 years old, and she is absolutely determined, I'm going to meet Rudolf, and I'm going to have my way with him. She goes to all the fashionable race meetings. She's very stylish. The Viennese papers say she's one of the sort of best-dressed girls of the season. She wrote to her governess, I cannot live without having seen or spoken to him. And as luck would have it, she's about to see him. Because one afternoon, she's in the tea pavilion at the races when Rudolf walks in with the future Edward VII, the Prince of Wales. We've already described, tried to give him instruction in sexual matters, but found there was nothing that Rudolf didn't know. Now, Edward, Bertie, as he was called slightly confusingly, recognised her from England, and he sort of stopped to say hello, and he introduced Rudolf.
Hello, my dear.
Yeah, very much.
Looking very pretty, if I may say so.
It's a fine filly. Exactly. And he introduced Rudolf. Have you met my good friend, the Crown Prince? But Rudolf just bowed, and he didn't say anything to her. He obviously wasn't that taken with her.
Or is he playing hard to get?
Well, we don't know. A few days later, their paths crossed again at the court theatre. But Rudolf didn't really interact with her at all. And the reason for that is he's got these royal guests. So first of all, he's had the Prince of Wales. And they had a brilliant time. They went to the races, as we've just heard. They go to the Hotel Sacher and have Sachertorte, and they laughing and having a great time, having champagne, surely with cognac and morphine, with actually Rudolf's another Jewish friend of his banker, Baron Moritz Hirsch. So this, I think, reflects very well both on Crown Prince Rudolf and on the Prince of Wales. In this very feverish political environment, they're publicly associating with well-known kind of Jewish figures. And Rudolf said to Stephanie, his wife, oh, this is brilliant. He's indefatigable. Nothing seems to tire the old boy. So they were having a great time. But Rudolf knows that as soon as the Prince of Wales goes, things will take a turn for the worse, because the worst person in the world, in his mind, is about to arrive in Vienna. And that is the Kaiser. And of course, the timing is really bad, because there's been all this hullabaloo about Schönerer and the Pan-Germans. And Rudolf and indeed his father and the court in general are worried that when the Kaiser arrives in Vienna, all the Pan-Germans will come out on the streets. They'll have demonstrations shouting how brilliant the Kaiser is. And that's not good. And Rudolf actually said to Stephanie, his wife, the splendid line, left to me, I would invite Wilhelm only to get rid of him in some elegant hunting accident. Which would have been an amusing way to get rid of the Kaiser. Anyway, the Kaiser arrived in Vienna on the 3rd of October, and I'm very, very sorry to report that he let himself, Germany, and the podcast down immediately. They brought the court opera orchestra to the palace, to the Hofburg, to play selections from Wagner in his honor. And the Kaiser disgraced himself by a quote, he talked and laughed noisily during the performance. So bad behavior from him. For the next few days, he does nothing but tell the Austrians, he's just such a terrible guest. He's constantly saying to the Austrians, this is wrong, you should do this, you're not doing this properly. He's terrible at that. He says you're too lax with your newspapers, you're too soft on the Slavs. He says at one point, if you were ever to give the Slavs more political rights and move towards a more federal structure, we'd probably have to drop you as an ally. You know, he's got a sort of Donald Trump approach to diplomacy. And then he goes to a palace reception and he really disgraces himself by attacking the Austrian army. He says, "You've ordered the wrong ammunition for your Mannlicher repeater rifles. You made a schoolboy error. Who's the Inspector General of your army? What a muppet he must be."
And who is it, Dominic?
There's Crown Prince Rudolf.
Oh, no.
Who's standing right next to him.
Is he amused by this?
No, he bowed, clicked his heels and left, as did his mother. So the Russian ambassador who was there said it was absolutely excruciating, but obviously par for the course with the Kaiser. Now, it's about this point in time where perhaps unsurprisingly, people start to notice a marked change in Rudolf's demeanour. So his wife Stephanie wrote later, "I could not fail to notice an alarming change in him. It was not only that he was more restless and distraught than ever before. In addition, he had become prone to outbursts of fierce anger on the most trifling occasions. He was often quite unrecognisable." And it's this time as well that Rudolf writes a letter to his friend Maurice Seps, the newspaper editor, and he says, you know, he's very apocalyptic in his letters. He says, "I'd like to see a war, actually. I think we need a war with Russia. War must come soon, a great time when we shall be happy, because after its glorious end, we could build the foundations of a great and beautiful Austria." So the storm clouds in his mind are blacker than ever. And then here's a key moment in the story. Mid-October, another of his cousins, Countess Mary Larisch, comes to see him. And she is the same age as Rudolf. She's 30. She's a relative of his mother. She's a sort of social butterfly, Viennese social butterfly. She has appointed herself Mary Vetsera's mentor.
What does that mean? Basically her board? Or
yeah, a little bit like who's the Madame de Merteuil, is it, in Dangerous Liaisons? The sort of Glenn Close figure who grooms younger women.
Lady Melbourne.
Exactly right. So Mary Vetsera has told Countess Larisch that she fancies Crown Prince Rudolf, and the Countess has said, "I'll fix it for you. I'll sort this out." So the Countess says to Rudolf, "My young friend Mary met you at the races. She didn't get a chance to express the loyalty and admiration she feels for you, and she'd love to have another meeting with you." And Rudolf said, "Oh, haven't I seen her in like the fashion pages?" And Countess Larisch said, "Oh, yes. She's a most interesting and captivating person. There'll be a new court theatre opening on the Ringstrasse in a couple of days with electric lighting. Very exciting. She'll be there. You should look out for her." So on the 14th of October, Rudolf goes to the court theatre opening. And Mary's there in the Vetsera family box with her mother and her sister. She's very elegantly turned out. She's got diamonds in her hair. And they don't speak, but Rudolf can see her watching him through her opera glasses. And then a couple of days later, he sends his elderly valet, who's called Niehammer, with a message for Countess Larisch. And the day after that, Countess Larisch picks up Mary Vetsera from her family house and she takes her for a coach ride to the Prater Park. And it's a cold autumn day, so the park is empty. But when they get there, there's one other coach waiting silently under a chestnut tree. They park next to this other coach. Mary gets out of the coach, into the second coach, and it rolls off into the mist. And inside the second coach is Crown Prince Rudolf. And for the next hour or two, they drive around this park, and Rudolf's drawn the curtains, and Rudolf's coachman drops her off back with Countess Larisch. And then a few days later, on the 5th of November, the decisive encounter. Countess Larisch says to Mary's mother, "I'd like to take Mary shopping. I'd like her advice because she's such a fashionista." If they go out to the shops, but in fact, they're picked up straight away by Rudolf's coachman, and he takes them to a back entrance of the palace, the Hofburg. And there, Mary is led upstairs to Rudolf's apartment. And we'll let Mary tell the story herself from a letter to her old governess. She said, "I looked around me. On his desk was a revolver and a skull. I picked up the skull and looked at it from all sides. Suddenly, Rudolf came in and took it from me. And when I said that I wasn't afraid, he smiled."
My goodness. Cliffhangers. We've got them. So, next time, the mystery of Mayerling races towards its spectacular, bloody, and empire-shaking conclusion. And members of the Rest is History Club, of course, can hear that right now at therestishistory.com. And just to say, fabulous news, Dominic. We are running a summer sale. So if you're not a member of the Rest is History Club, for a limited time, you can get an extra 20% off. I mean, that's insane value, isn't it?
That's giving it away. It's madness. I think it's too much.
20% off an annual membership using the code SUMMER26, and that's only valid until August 31st. So absolutely not something to leave hanging.
I urge people not to do this because I don't want them to have that deal. It's too good a deal.
20%, Dominic, 20%.
Too much.
Are we doing this for nothing?
Madness. My accountant will be raging.
Just incredible value there.
There's even better news, isn't there? Is there not live show news?
Yeah, there is. I'd forgotten about that. If you think the Mayerling Incident is an amazing story, then we have an even better one coming up. And this is the ultimate Victorian adventure, the Abyssinian expedition of 1868. By some measures, a tragic story, and by some measures, a richly comical story. And we'll be trying to blend the two aspects of that. And we will be doing that live at the South Bank Centre in London on Friday, the 4th of September. And tickets, of course, at therestishistory.com. An old servant was waiting for us by a small iron door. He led us through a number of dark stairs and rooms until he asked us to enter a certain door. As I crossed the threshold, a black bird, some kind of raven, flew at my head. A voice called from the next room. "Please come in." Marie ushered me in. We talked a while about Vienna. Then he said to me, "Pardon me, but I would like to talk to the Countess privately for a few minutes." And then he went with Marie to another room. I looked around me. On his desk was a revolver and a skull. I picked up the skull, took it between my hands, and looked at it from all sides. Suddenly, Rudolf came in and took it from me with deep apprehension. But when I said that I wasn't afraid, he smiled. So that is an amazing scene, like something, we said it before, from a kind of Gothic melodrama, Edgar Allan Poe or something like that. But in fact, that is a letter that was written by the 17-year-old Baroness Mary Vetsera to her old governess in the autumn of 1888. In fact, it's like something out of Dracula, isn't it? A letter written to a governess by a 17-year-old girl who has invited herself into the room of an exceedingly sinister man. And she is describing there a secret meeting with the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Crown Prince Rudolf. And this had happened a few days earlier on the 5th of November. And Dominic, if listeners, which I hope they will have done, have heard our first episode, then they will know where this is heading. And it is nowhere good for Baroness Mary, because she is heading to a hunting lodge at Mayerling in the Vienna woods. And what happens there is going to be one of the greatest scandals in the entire history, not just of Austro-Hungarian, but of European royalty. It is going to be a murder-suicide pact that will shake the Habsburg dynasty to its very foundations. So, Dominic, it's an amazing story.
Yeah, it is an amazing, amazing tale. And today we'll be telling the story of that secret affair between Rudolf and Mary. We will get deep into what exactly happened at Mayerling, and we'll talk about the implications for the Habsburg dynasty and for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But just to remind ourselves exactly when and where we are. We're in Vienna in 1888, the world of Klimt and Freud and Mahler and these titanic cultural figures. Also the world of Crown Prince Rudolf, the sinister man in the Gothic melodrama that you described so chillingly, I have to say, in your introductory reading.
Thank you.
So Crown Prince Rudolf is 30 years old. He is, to remind people, he is the son of Emperor Franz Joseph and his very glamorous, kind of melancholy wife, Sisi.
Very thin, very long hair.
And Rudolf, who takes after his mother, I think it's reasonable to surmise, he is a very troubled, unhappy, kind of morbid young man. He's almost certainly suffering from incurable gonorrhea. He's probably off his face on morphine, and he is suffocated by the kind of expectations of his role as Crown Prince. And also, I think he is being eaten away by a sense of uselessness and futility as he waits for his father to die and to vacate the throne. And into Rudolf's orbit, as we described last time, has come the teenage Baroness Mary Vetsera. She is precocious. She's a social butterfly. She's a social climber. She's ambitious, but she's also incredibly romantic in a very 17-year-old sort of teenage girl way.
Well, you could see, couldn't you, from that extract that she wrote? Is it actually like a Gothic melodrama, or is she putting that spin on it?
Of course.
Bit of both, probably.
Was there really a blackbird, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it seems improbable. But
And she had gone to that meeting with her older friend, Countess Mary Larish, who is Rudolf's cousin. And basically the Countess Larish has acted as the sort of intermediary and put the two of them together.
The board.
She is the board. Yeah, you could say she's the procurer, as it were.
Yeah.
So the events that you described, Monday the 5th of November, 1888, we ended the last episode with this scene. Countess Larish has offered to take Mary shopping with her mother's permission. They went to the Graben, the great shopping street in Vienna. They went to a society photographer to have Mary's picture taken, but then they went to the back entrance to the Grand Hotel to a carriage, which was waiting for them, driven by Rudolf's coachman, Josef Bratfisch.
Bratfisch?
Yeah, it's a great name.
That is worthy of an American.
Totally. It is, yeah.
And Dominic, this whole thing about women being taken to the, to hotels, the back rooms of hotels and things, and being driven off in carriages, faint echo of Diana about this, isn't there? We've kind of mentioned it in the context of Cece.
Yeah, definitely there is. I mean, it's very much a kind of Diana in the 1990s vibe to this, I think.
Yeah.
The Diana story doesn't quite have that Gothic element to it, though, does it? It's rather more Hello Magazine. This is much more Hello Magazine meets Bram Stoker, as you said.
Yeah.
So from there, she was taken to the Hofburg, the Imperial Palace, to Rudolf's private apartments, and then we get the scene with the raven and the skull. And so begins their relationship, their affair. Now, this is not unusual for Rudolf. Rudolf has had a lot of affairs, and all the time he's still seeing his regular mistress, who is the former courtesan Mitzi Kaspar. And Mary herself, actually, this is not her first rodeo. So she, for an aristocratic girl of 17, is probably quite experienced. She'd been on a trip to Egypt a year earlier, and it was generally thought that she'd been carrying on with a British brigadier.
Oh, my goodness. Not General Gordon.
Yeah.
That would be improbable.
Wow, that's a twist. General Gordon, who is still alive in this version of history.
Okay, fine.
Well, anyway, she's had loads of admirers, not just Crown Prince Rudolf. So what makes this particular liaison so special? Well, you described how Mary Vetsera's account owes something to Gothic melodrama, but it pales by comparison with this, which is from Rudolf's military aide Victor von Frischter. And he tells this absolutely extraordinary story. He said later, when we were young men, we were stationed in Prague when we were younger. And we went, me and Crown Prince Rudolf, to the ghetto cemetery. The old town cemetery in Prague. Very evocative, moving.
With the grave of the rabbi who created the golem.
The golem, exactly.
The kind of prototype for Frankenstein.
So this really kind of haunting, spooky kind of landscape. And they went there, and the cantor was singing prayers during a funeral. And Rudolf was very taken by this, according to his aide, and particularly by the cantor's raven-haired daughter. And she became obsessed with Crown Prince Rudolf too, so obsessed that her father had to send her to a provincial town to get her away from him. But she came back to Prague. She stood every night under his castle window through the winter. Rudolf eventually found out that she was standing underneath his window. But when he sent people to look for her, they reported that she had just caught pneumonia and died. And Rudolf went secretly to her grave and left roses by her tombstone.
So do you think there's a possibility that raven was the reincarnation of this girl who died of... And I imagine it wasn't pneumonia, I imagine it was consumption.
Well, I think Victor von Fritsch has a very lively imagination.
Yes.
Because Victor von Fritsch, Rudolf's aide, said, the Crown Prince clearly believed that this Mary Vetsera was the reincarnation of this Jewish girl from Prague.
Oh, God, there is reincarnation.
And this is why he was so obsessed with her. This is his interpretation. Whether listeners believe this, I'll leave to them. I mean, I don't think she was the reincarnation of this girl, but who knows?
But I suppose the question is whether Rudolf might have thought that.
He might have done.
He might have done, because he has that kind of sensibility, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. And the way their relationship is carried out is all like they're sort of cosplaying in a Gothic melodrama. So they would always meet kind of at dusk in the shadows, or they'd meet in his very gloomy kind of palace apartment with the skull on the table.
God. I mean, they would so be into black eyeshadow now if they lived now, wouldn't they?
They completely would. They're total goths, aren't they? Or emo or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're going on these sort of carriage rides in the dusk through the abandoned, deserted Prater Park and all of this. After a few days, Rudolf gave her an iron wedding ring. It was inscribed with the letters ILVBIDT. In Liebe vereint bis in der Tod. Through love united unto death. And she wore it on a kind of chain under her bodice. And she is clearly absolutely infatuated with him in a very recognizable kind of teenage way. So she wrote to her old governess, if I could give my life to make him happy, I would gladly do it because I do not value my own life. And in one of these letters, she says to her governess, we've discussed what would happen if people found out about us. We have made a pact covering such an eventuality. After a few happy hours at a place nobody knows, we will enter death forever. Now, at one level, this is not unusual. This is the kind of slightly madly overwrought thing that teenage girls who are going out with married older men write. He hates his wife. He will abandon me and we will go into the shadows. All of this.
And especially in fin de siècle Vienna.
Exactly.
That kind of mood of lush morbidity.
Yeah, completely. On the other hand, there are hints that Rudolf sees this as something more than just a sort of lovelorn joke or something. So on All Souls Day, on the 2nd of November, he met his mother's lady-in-waiting, Countess Festatich, in a palace corridor. And he said, are you off to the cemetery, Countess? And she said, yes, Your Imperial Highness, to pray for my dead. When I'm gone, will you pray for me? Will you include me among your dead? And she said, Your Imperial Highness is smiling. It is a joke. A smile doesn't always mean a joke. Your Imperial Highness, I'm much older than you. I pray God I shall never have a chance to do what you ask. I mean, he's clearly a man who's just walking around the palace talking to people unnecessarily about death and about his own death.
Yeah.
Anyway, the weeks pass. In early December, I mean, don't forget, they haven't been going out very long. They've been going out about 4 weeks. In early December, Countess Larish has to go back to her husband's estate in Bohemia, and they need a new way of hooking up Rudolf and Mary. And the way they find is through the unlikely romantic lubricant that is Richard Wagner.
He's very romantic. I mean, literally, the song is death.
I suppose, yeah. But I mean, if you said to somebody, why don't we use Wagner as an excuse to go on dates? I mean, that's a very particular vibe, is it not?
One I entirely approve of. I mean, the thing is, if she doesn't like Wagner, then perhaps she'd be better off going out with the Kaiser.
Yes, exactly.
Who had laughed and chatted all the way through Wagner in the previous episode.
Yeah. And also the Kaiser's not a man who's ever going to top himself, right? The Kaiser is a better investment.
I think so. Yes, I think so.
He's also not riddled with gonorrhea.
Well, quite.
So anyway, the court opera is doing this big new production of the Ring Cycle, starting with Das Rheingold. And the Vetseras have a box at the opera. But Mary says to her mother, I hate Wagner. This would have been a red flag for you, Tom, if you and Mary had matched on Hinge. You'd have been like, what? No interest in Wagner? Unbelievable. I'm out. So she tells her mother, I'm not going to Wagner. She keeps coming up with excuses not to go. And then when her mother and sister went off to the opera, she would slip out of the house. Bratfish, the coachman, would be waiting at the corner.
I can't believe he's called Bratfish.
And he would drive her to Schönbrunn Palace, the Austrian Versailles. And she and Rudolf would kind of walk in the darkness of the park. And then she'd always be back in time for her mother and sister's return at 10 o'clock. So
it's brilliant, isn't it, that Wagner's operas are so long?
Amazing. But there's still no sort of physical side to this relationship, it seems. Frederick Morton, in his book A Nervous Splendor, says the reason is that Rudolf is postponing this because Rudolf believed that climax meant end, meaning death.
It's sad, isn't he, that Freud never got the chance to psychoanalyze him.
I know.
He just feels an ideal patient.
Completely, with his mother, his distant father, all of this.
The yearning for death. I mean, yeah.
Anyway, we get to Christmas. So the imperial family for once are actually reunited at the palace. Cece's birthday is on Christmas Eve. So Rudolf's mother's birthday. And that in Austria is when the Christkind brings your presents. The Christ child. She's just got back from Corfu, which she loves. You've seen her palace in Corfu, have you not?
Yeah, the Kileon.
And she's come back from Corfu with an anchor tattooed on her shoulder.
Yeah.
Which is punchy.
I always thought this was unusual behaviour, but a whole host of members of royal families throughout the late 19th century were doing it.
Yeah.
So it had obviously become a kind of royal craze.
It was, exactly. Well, George V and his brother went off to Japan, I think, and got dragons tattooed on their
Yes.
arms or something.
Yeah.
Incredible. Anyway, they gathered in Cece's apartment that night, and Rudolf very thoughtfully had laid the table with presents. He got her a book of letters by Heine, who was her favourite German writer, and a packet of 11 original Heine letters that he had sent to a relative in Paris.
That is thoughtful, Dominic, because there's nothing more thoughtful than giving someone a letter written by someone they particularly admire.
Can you think of an example of this, Tom?
Anyone who does that, I think, is beneath the show of cynical cruelty or whatever it is.
Yeah.
A cherubic lovable.
Is there anything you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, because you brought me a letter written by Nelson.
There you go. Thank you.
It's one of my most treasured possessions.
That comparison with Crown Prince Rudolf that has dogged me all my life. Yet more ammunition to the people who say, is he the reincarnation of Crown Prince Rudolf? Because the parallels are uncanny.
Yeah, they are.
I would work on an encyclopedia if my father ordered me to. And he's been working on his Austro-Hungarian encyclopedia. So he's got copies of that wrapped up.
I mean, you write history books that are like encyclopedias.
Correct. Yeah, thank you. I was fishing for that. And there are presents all around. So Franz Joseph and Cece have got presents for Rudolf and Stephanie's daughter, Elisabeth. I mean, it's often forgotten in this story that he has a daughter. I think she's about 5 or 6. And they've got her kind of toy garden furniture made in Corfu.
Can I just ask, he's got a lovely present for his mother.
Yeah.
Has he got anything for his father?
No mention of that. It's not his father's birthday, though, to be fair.
That's true.
Also, what do you give the man who owns Central Europe?
A uniform.
Yeah. You give him Venice back or something.
That's what he'd like.
Yeah. So this sounds lovely, but Rudolf spends the festive season brooding darkly. His hatred of the Kaiser has now reached absolute fever pitch. Basically, since the Kaiser went back to Berlin newspapers have just been mercilessly mocking the Austrian army. And this has driven Rudolf mad. And Rudolf has written to his mate Morris Sepps, the kind of newspaper editor. And he says, I can give you information about that when we went hunting in Styria with Kaiser Wilhelm, a prostitute stole Wilhelm's cufflinks.
Do you know who this unexpectedly reminds me of? Is Harold Wilson in 1974.
Really?
Releasing mad stories to the press.
Yes, I can see that actually.
Clearly made up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you think this is made up or do you think a prostitute? I think the Kaiser is precisely the kind of man who might have his cufflinks stolen by a lady of the night. No?
Yeah, I suppose.
He'd be an unpopular customer. He wouldn't be a great tipper. And in revenge, his escorts would steal items of his personal apparel, hoping to blackmail him later. Anyway, Rudolf sends him this letter and says, I want you to hold on to this. If the Berlin press continues slagging me off, you can print it. And then a couple of days later, he writes again to this editor and he says, I feel the storm clouds are gathering over Austria. In international politics, there is a temporary quiet. The dangers threatening us from Serbia, wow, that's a little preview of what's coming, are postponed for the moment. But this uncanny stillness gives me the impression of calm before the storm. It can't go on like this. That's my consolation. And this editor writes back and says, you're not feeling good. That's a shame. I think you're brilliant. The future is yours. You never tire, unlike so many other people. And it's because our crown prince never tires that we still believe in a great, glorious, free and prosperous Austria. So basically sucking up to Rudolf to try to mollify him.
Mm.
The very end of the year, Rudolf and Stephanie, his wife, they go to a place called Opatia, but at the time called Abatia, which was on the Adriatic. It's on the Croatian coast. It was the Cannes or the Saint-Tropez of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So palm trees, hotels, sort of tea lounges, all of this. Rudolf doesn't like it. He finds it very boring. He comes back early to Vienna.
It's not very Gothic, is it?
No, it's not very Gothic. It's very dull as far as he's concerned. And he finds his wife very dull. He comes back to Vienna. He finds, as usual, there have been meetings of the army command without him, which he's very annoyed by. They didn't invite him because they thought he was on holiday. Then they're into the carnival season. Now, because the Austrian court are still mourning the death of the Kaiser's father the previous summer, court sort of regulations forbid them from going to balls. So what that means is they have to just give a series of dinners for visiting dignitaries, royalty, aristocracy, and so on. Rudolf again finds this very boring, but the one consolation is that he can resume his affair with Mary Vetsera. And the key date here is the 13th of January. And we know this from Mary's letter the next day to her old governess. She said, "I must make a confession. I was with him yesterday evening from 7 till 9. We both lost our heads. Now we belong to each other, body and soul. On Saturday, I hope to get away from a ball and then I will rush back to him. So we belong to each other, body and soul. We lost our heads. We all know what happened between 7 and 9 that evening." And that same day, she went to the most expensive jewelry shop in Vienna and she ordered a gold cigarette case inscribed with the date of their tryst the night before, the 13th of January. And she wants to give it to the Crown Prince to remember the occasion. And my guess is that it was probably around now that he floated seriously the idea that he had mentioned a few weeks earlier, which she mentioned to her governess, the idea that one day they will be discovered, that we will go to a happy place that nobody knows, and then we will enter death together. And this is not the first time that Rudolf has mentioned this to a woman, because we know that he had mentioned it to his regular mistress, Mitzi Kaspar, before Christmas, and she had laughed at him and thought it was a joke.
I thought that there were, in versions I've read of this, she goes to the police and tells them, and the police refuse to listen to her because she's just a prostitute. Is that not true? Yeah,
I don't know how true that is. So I've seen that online, and I've seen that repeated in kind of general histories, but I'm not convinced how true that. I mean, it may be true. Maybe listeners who, particularly Austrian listeners who might have read German language versions of this, may be more familiar with it. But in, for example, Frederick Morton's book, which is kind of day by day, there's no mention of this, just mentions her laughing at him. There's a slight disconnect, actually, between laughing at somebody because you think they're joking.
Yeah, and then going to the police.
Is it a better story if they go to the police? She goes to the police? Maybe it is a better story. What we do know for certain is that Mary didn't laugh. Mary is not a joker in that way. And she takes her relationship with the Crown Prince incredibly seriously. She sees it in these very overwrought terms. But of course, this is, again, what we don't know. We don't know what they said to each other. We cannot know how much she was coerced. You know, he's 30. He's the Crown Prince.
She's a massive goth, though, isn't she? I mean, you said...
She's a massive goth, of course, but how much she enters into this pact, voluntarily, difficult to say. Anyway, Rudolf's friends and acquaintances suspect absolutely nothing. That month, he seems calm, he seems untroubled, he seems polite. He goes repeatedly to operettas or to the opera. On the 23rd of January, for example, he goes to see a comedy called The Dandies of Vienna, and he's cheered by the audience. He's working on his encyclopedia. He writes an article, one of his many anonymous articles for a monarchist periodical, in which he basically says people should stop going on about Germany and how brilliant Germany is. People should put their faith in Austria, ancient, united and undivided. And of course, being a Habsburg, he does a lot of hunting. So he's not quite in his cousin Franz Ferdinand's league. So Franz Ferdinand, his kind of younger cousin and protege, and sort of a world-class butcher of birds. But Rudolf still, he sees an eagle, he likes to shoot it. So he shot 3 eagles on the 20th, 3 more on the 21st, and 5 deer on the 23rd of January. On the 24th of January, so Thursday the 24th, he now has less than a week to live, by the way. Bratfish drove him to meet Mary by the Prater Park. Again, it was very cold, very deserted, no one there. And they fixed a date at this meeting. They said, let's go to the Mayerling hunting lodge on Monday. Because he said, I'm going there anyway with some friends to do some more hunting. And that evening, the evening of Thursday the 24th, he went to the court opera and he sat beside his father in the imperial box. They were spotted deep in a very serious conversation, but nobody knows or will ever know what was said. On Friday the 25th, he has 5 days to live. He goes hunting again on the banks of the Danube. He shot 26 ducks, which seems like a lot, actually. And then he went back to town. He went to Hodek's taxidermist shop on the Maria Hilferstrasse, where they'd been stuffing his eagles for him.
God. I mean, the whole empty fairgrounds, stuffy taxidermists.
It's brilliant.
It's got it all.
I was thinking about this. I think this would be a brilliant Alfred Hitchcock film.
David Lynch would enjoy it as well.
Yeah. There are lots of directors who would do really, really good different versions of this.
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan would cast Cillian Murphy, surely, as Crown Prince Rudolf. A young Cillian Murphy.
Yeah. And Michael Caine as his father.
Yeah. I was about to say Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy's the coachman, surely.
Yes. Tom Hardy is Bradfish.
Surely everyone wants to see that.
That would be the spin-off series. Bradfish.
Yeah. He's solving crimes with Sigmund
He's
Freud.
solving crimes with Freud.
Fantastic. All right. So he's gone to the taxidermist shop. Then he goes to a painter's studio. I've put the painter in just so I can say his name. His name is Tadeusz Ajukowicz. And he is a Pole, I think, for given his name. And he's painting Rudolf on horseback, showing him as an infantry general. And then he goes to the palace for dinner.
Does the painting, the portrait of Rudolf, start to weep tears?
Surely. Yeah, definitely.
Of blood.
So Saturday, the 26th, he has 4 days to live. The same routine. And as if to punish him, the fates are mocking him, because that evening there's a court dinner to celebrate, of all things, Kaiser Wilhelm II's birthday. Oh, no. So Rudolf has to dress up in his uniform as an honorary colonel of the 2nd Brandenburg Ulan Regiment. And this must be a terrible thing for him, because he regards the Kaiser as the worst man in history, a dreadful bounder. But he has to sort of smile and make small talk about how brilliant the Kaiser is. The next day, Sunday the 27th, there are now 3 days to go. Same routine, hunting, taxidermist shop, portrait. And then he rushes back to the Hofburg and he changes into civilian clothes, and Bratfish drives him to the back entrance, the tradesman's entrance of the Grand Hotel. And there he goes upstairs, up the back stairs, to Countess Larish's suite. So she's come back from Bohemia. She's the go-between once again with Mary. Then he goes back into the coach. They go off to the Prater, the deserted park. Mary is waiting there in a coach of her own. Again, a hurried meeting with Mary to finalize the plans for tomorrow. And then back to the palace. Another quick change into another German uniform, because he has to go to another reception for the Kaiser's birthday.
Oh, God. No wonder he shoots himself.
Yeah. Imagine your most hated enemy having to dress up in uniforms and go to
salute him.
It's like a nightmare, right? It's like or a Greek punishment. It's like Sisyphus had it easy.
Yeah.
So he has to go to a reception, the German embassy, for the Kaiser's birthday. Now, at this reception is his father and also his wife, Crown Princess Stephanie, who's looking very elegant, and his lover, Mary Vetsera. So they're all there.
Is their relationship now common knowledge? Does Stephanie know, do we think?
I don't know. We just don't know. So there is a moment, supposed it's a moment, I think this is made up actually, where Stephanie and Mary came face to face, and there was apparently a little pause before Mary curtsied. She waited just too long, like a little gesture of disrespect to Rudolph's wife. Well, that's what people said afterwards, but I suspect at the time.
Yes, it sounds retrospective.
It's retrospective, yeah, exactly. Now, Rudolf is very pale and quiet at this reception, partly because he hates the Kaiser, but also maybe for other reasons. At one point, he's making small talk with a sculptor called Victor Tilgner, and later claimed, again, this may be retrospective, that at one point, Rudolf gave a kind of shiver or shudder and said to him, "This whole uniform is distasteful to me, unbearably heavy," and that was the only hint of something. But of course, that could be just a banal thing. It could be he hates German uniforms.
I mean, it really could be heavy.
It could indeed.
I imagine there were a lot of medals.
Surely. And epaulets.
Yeah, weighing his shoulders down.
He doesn't stay long at this reception, though. By midnight, he's gone, and he doesn't go back to the palace. he goes to the apartment of his mistress, Mitzi Kaspar, and they drink champagne laced with cognac.
Our favourite drink, our favourite tipple.
A favourite drink, exactly. We'll be drinking that at the Rest is History Christmas party. And Rudolf says to Mitzi, tomorrow morning I'm leaving to go hunting forever. And Mitzi kind of laughs at him. She doesn't go to the police. She laughs. And she thinks to herself, this is the kind of mad thing that Rudolf says all the time, because he's a bit of a goth. He's always saying morbid things like this. 3:00 in the morning, he leaves her apartment to go back to the Imperial Palace, the Hofburg. And there's an odd little gesture. As he leaves, he makes the sign of the cross on her forehead, even though he doesn't believe in God. He's told her he doesn't believe in God.
Oh, we talked about this yesterday, about whether he would have viewed suicide as a sin, but clearly not.
So he goes back to the Imperial Palace. He has a couple of hours sleep, and he's up by 7:00 in the morning. He goes through his paperwork. He has meetings with officials. At 11:00, outside his office, the clock of St. Michael's, which is the chapel next door, sounds the hour. And Rudolf calls in his adjutants and he says, cancel my appointments, please, for the rest of the morning. I'm going shooting. Now I'll be back tomorrow, 5:00. I'm going to have dinner with the emperor, as agreed. And on his way out of the palace, he stops briefly at his wife's apartment. He says goodbye to Stephanie and to their daughter Elisabeth. And he repeats this message, I'll be back tomorrow for dinner. So by 11:30, he's on his way. And Rudolf has left the palace. Now, meanwhile, Mary Vetsera and Countess Larasch have already left the Vetsera family mansion, which is on the Salesianergasse in Vienna. They told Mary's mother they were going shopping, which they've said so many times, at 10:30. But once they got into the cab, they changed the address. They went to the Hofburg Palace, back entrance again. Once again, Rudolf's coachman, Mr. Bratfish, played by Tom Hardy, is waiting, and he takes them out of the city. So the carriage rolls out of the city, and they go into the Vienna woods, and they stop beside an inn called the Red Barn, the Roter Stadel, which is closed for the winter. Again, a very Gothic scene, this abandoned inn.
People are always being murdered in red barns, aren't they?
Yeah, right. Good spot. So they wait for 20 minutes in the cold by this inn, and then they see a man in a fur-collared coat coming through the woods towards them. And this is Crown Prince Rudolf.
It's such a great film.
It is.
Isn't it? Be amazing.
Of course. He's coming through the mist or whatever.
Yeah.
He comes through the trees, and he gets into their carriage. His own carriage that brought him out of the city is now going back to the city, being tailed, as always, by the police. So the police always followed him.
So they've shaken off the police now?
Now he's shaken off the police. So he and Mary and Bratfish drive on together towards his hunting lodge at Mayerling, which is about 20 miles southeast of Vienna. And they arrive round about sunset. So that's about 5:00.
Of course they do.
Of course.
As the ravens flock around the gatehouse.
It's a really cold, dark evening. The servants have lit the fires in the hunting lodge. Here they will be alone, well, alone except for all the servants, until the next day. But back in the city, Countess Larasch, who has engineered all this, has this flash of revelation. And we absolutely don't know why. Is it something that Mary said before she left? Is it something that Rudolf said in the last few days that has been, preying on her mind, or who knows? But at lunchtime, once she'd seen Mary off, she went back to the Vetsera mansion and she asked to see Mary's mother. And she said, I've lost your daughter. I don't know where she is. I'm worried about her. And that afternoon, one of Mary's uncles, Alexander Baltazzi, went to see the police commissioner of Vienna. And he said, we've lost Mary. We've lost the 17-year-old Baroness. Can you help us find her? And eventually he said to the police commissioner, look, we think she's gone off with Crown Prince Rudolf. And the commissioner said, well, come on. I mean, if she's gone off with Crown Prince Rudolf, we're hardly going to launch a massive police investigation. For one thing, we are constitutionally barred from investigating the imperial family. But for another, what are you so stressed about? The Crown Prince has loads of affairs. Clearly, Mary Vetsera is one of his mistresses. She's 17 years old. She knows what she's doing. She's quite racy. She's mature beyond her years. These things happen. What are you worried about?
Yeah, what's the worst that could happen?
What's the worst that could happen? Well, We will find out the answer to that question after the break.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Rest is History, where it is the early morning of Tuesday on the 29th of January, 1889, and we are in the Mayerling hunting lodge, some 20-odd miles outside Vienna, where two friends of Crown Prince Rudolf, Count Joseph Hoyos and Prince Philip of Coburg, have arrived for a day's sport. They're going to go out and murder birds. And Dominic, what happens as they approach the hunting lodge?
Well, a very sort of gothic or fairy tale scene. They approach the house and it's completely still and silent. And they see that the curtains on the bedroom windows of Rudolf's ground floor apartment are closed. But the servants are up. The servants admit them. And in the billiard room, Crown Prince Rudolf is waiting.
So alive and well.
He's alive and well, and he seems in good form.
Or is he well?
Well, he's not well. He's got gonorrhea, and he's like off his face on morphine and champagne. But apart from that, and he looks really haggard and gaunt, and like looks like a man who's conceived a murder-suicide pact. But apart from that, he looks like he's in brilliant form.
And has he got the kind of little snuffle?
Possibly, yes. He's got a bit of a cold, he says. He's got a silk scarf tied very tightly around his neck. He says, I've got a cold, and I probably won't come hunting with you, lads, after all. So you go ahead. I'll sit it out. They have a cup of coffee, and then Hoyos and Coburg go out to do some hunting. And they return at lunchtime, and Rudolf is waiting for them, and he's still in good form. The Prince of Coburg is going back to Vienna straight away that afternoon. And Rudolf says, well, because of this cold, I'm not going to head back when I thought, dinner with my father. So please, pass on my message. And he also says to his valet, who's called Loschek, he says, can you send a telegram to my wife, please, Crown Princess Stephanie? The telegram reads, please tell Papa that I ask his pardon for not appearing at dinner, but because of a heavy cold, I wish to avoid the journey this afternoon. So the Prince of Coburg goes off. The telegram is sent. Count Hoyos goes shooting on his own. So I think that's a slightly joyless thing to do, frankly. Anyway, he goes hunting on his own. He goes and shoots loads of birds, and then he comes back to spend the evening with Rudolf, to have dinner with Rudolf. And they have, it's very Rest is History Christmas party, actually. They have pâté de foie gras, they have venison, they have roast beef, red wine, and then they have a sort of leisurely smoke. And they talk about the latest army legislation, which has been held up in the parliament in Budapest because of wrangling with the Hungarians. And Rudolf is clearly in quite good form. He's coming out with some great banter. He says, it's much easier to deal with gun dogs than with Hungarian politicians. And Hoyos thinks this is absolutely hilarious. And says afterwards, he turned on me the whole beguiling force of his personality. So actually, I mean, the mad thing is that Rudolf hates the Kaiser, because this is the kind of banter the Kaiser would very much enjoy.
Yeah, it is. I don't think his mother would approve.
No.
See, she loves Hungarian.
Exactly. Anyway, at 9:00, Hoyos says, right, I'm turning in now. Hoyos is going to spend the night in guest quarters in a converted farm cottage, which is about 500 meters from the main house. And as soon as Hoyos has gone down the path, the door of Rudolf's bedroom opens, and out comes Mary Vetsera. And she has been hiding in Rudolf's bedroom all this time. And because she's been hiding in the bedroom, and they've been afraid to send in food to her because Hoyos would notice. So she's starving. So Loschek, the valet, brings her cold venison, and he lights a fire in the billiard room. He brings champagne from the cellar, and he calls for Bratfish, the coachman. He's still hanging around. Aliyah in the chat points out that Bratfish means grilled fish. So I think that's a terrible surname, frankly. He's called Grilled Fish. That's his name.
I think we've established it's a ludicrous name.
So Bratfish sits on the stool in the corner of the billiard room, and he sings and whistles songs of old Vienna while they're eating their dinner, Mary and Rudolf.
That sounds incredibly annoying.
Right.
Can't you make him shut up?
Some bloke called Mr. Grilled Fish turns up and whistles at you.
It's the last thing you want.
Yeah.
Especially on your last night.
Right.
Oh, spoiler.
How did you want to spend your last hours?
No wonder they shot themselves.
Right. So they sit up very late. Loschek, the manservant, he turns in at 2:00. But he doesn't sleep for very long, because at 6:30, he's woken by footsteps. He looks up, and this would really freak you out. He looks up, and standing over him is the sepulchral figure of Crown Prince Rudolf in a dressing gown and a silk scarf, looking very pale. So Rudolf, standing over Loschek, says, "I want you to call me for breakfast in an hour." And he also says, "Tell Bratfish to have the horses ready." And then he walks back to his bedroom, a bizarre detail this, whistling one of Bratfish's tunes. So he walks back and he closes the door behind him. Now, Loschek at this point, he gets dressed. He's had about 3 hours sleep or something. Gets dressed and he goes to tell the kitchen staff, "Get up, come on, sort yourselves out, start getting breakfast ready." And at 7:30, as instructed, he knocks on the Crown Prince's door. And this is the scene with which we opened the first episode. Yep. This tremendous scene. Loschek knocks and he knocks again. He keeps knocking. He calls, "Your Imperial Highness." He runs upstairs, and then there's a spiral staircase at the back that goes down to a back door of Rudolf's apartment. And he knocks on the back door. Again, no reply. Loschek is becoming quite anxious now because Rudolf is a famously light sleeper. And the dogs started barking. So it's a slightly chaotic scene. The hunting dogs are all barking because of the knocking. And Loschek has got into a massive panic. He comes back to the front door. He gets a log from the fire and starts hammering on the door with this log. Bratfish, the coachman, joins him. Count Hoyos has come up from his cottage to find out what's going on. And then, as if that's not enough, the Prince of Coburg, who'd gone back to Vienna, he now turns up as well because he's come back to do some more hunting. They're all completely shocked and confounded by the scene. And they say to Loschek, "Okay, break down the door." And this is the point. He's now sobbing with worry. And this is the point when he says to them, "I have something to tell you. Baroness Mary Vetsera has been staying with the Crown Prince." And then this is the point when Hoyos and Coburg go into the billiard room and they have this sort of little conference. And eventually they come out and they basically say, "Well, even so, fine, okay, we're men of the world. Break down the door." And Loschek hacks at the door. He hacks at the panels. As you described in that reading that you did for the first episode, the hole becomes this kind of gash and he's able to look through. And he drops the axe in horror. Inside, it's total darkness. He can see the air is very heavy with smoke, but he can see 2 people lying on or near, it's really not clear from the descriptions, the bed. One of them is Mary. She's stretched out on the bed. Her hands are clasping a rose, and there's blood on the sheets around her head. And the other is Crown Prince Rudolf. He is kind of slumped against or leaning on a bedside table in front of a mirror, and there is blood trickling from his mouth, and it is absolutely obvious that they are both dead. And for a moment, the men outside are paralyzed with horror, and nobody dares to go in. And eventually, Hoyos says, "Okay, Bratfish, I need you to drive me to Baden Station, which is the nearest railway station." They get to Baden Station, and he has to go into the station master and say, "Something terrible has happened at Crown Prince Rudolf's hunting lodge. I must get to Vienna instantly." And the station master agrees to stop the express train from Trieste, and Hoyos climbs on board. So at 9:50, he is in Vienna, and within about 25 minutes, he has reached the Hofburg, the Imperial Palace. And here, he completely loses his nerve. He doesn't know how he can possibly break this news to the emperor. So he goes to find Cece's chamberlain, who is called Baron Nopscha. And they say, "Well, we will tell the Empress, and then she can tell the emperor." So Cece, Elisabeth, she got up early that morning. She got up at 6:30, as she always did. Her days always began with this long bath and then a massage. Then her hair famously long. There was a special maid to comb her hair.
Yeah, for 2 or 3 hours, learning Greek, all of that.
Yeah, and then she would have a herbal tea and she would do some exercises in her private gym. Then she, 10 o'clock, had started a Greek lesson with Monsieur Rousopholos, and they were reading the Iliad together. And at 10:45, there was a knock on the door, and the lady in waiting said, "Baron Nopscha and Count Hoyos want to see you urgently." And Elisabeth was furious. "You don't interfere with my Greek lessons." But then Baron Nopscha came in. She saw the look on his face, and she realized something was terribly wrong. Now, her husband, Franz Joseph, had been up even longer.
Well, he always gets up early, doesn't he? Because he's got an empire to run.
Right. He got up at 4 o'clock in the morning from his iron military bed.
Oh, God.
And he'd been washed by his footman. He'd had breakfast at 4:20. And then he got straight into his paperwork and had his first meetings at 5 o'clock in the morning. And a lot of this had been about the Budapest Parliament and the Army Bill. As Frederick Morton said, that morning Franz Joseph did what his ancestors had done before him. He ruled and overruled with utter confidence, with axiomatic competence, and without the slightest inspiration. Just before 11 o'clock, he set off to go to see his wife in her apartment. Franz Joseph was looking forward to this because he knew that his wife actually had a prearranged meeting with his confidant, Katharina Schratt, the actress. Katharina Schratt was going to do a drama recital for his wife. And this is brilliant for him because he'll see his two favourite people at once. And, their little ménage à trois, he loves all that. But he gets there and he finds Baron Nopscha blocking the door to his wife's apartment. Baron Nopscha's face is streaked with tears, and through the door, Franz Joseph can hear his wife sobbing and sobbing. So in the next few hours, the news that something terrible has happened races around the city. Crown Prince Rudolf's wife, Stephanie, is having a singing lesson, and that's interrupted, and she is told. And soon after that, all the operas, the theatres, the cabarets, the music halls are told to cancel their evening programmes with no explanation. And by mid-afternoon, there's a crowd outside the Hofburg. People know something has happened. There are people talking about Crown Prince Rudolf, but no one knows exactly what it is. And it's actually not until the following morning that the news is confirmed. It's broken by the Wiener Tagblatt. Our Crown Prince is dead, says this huge headline. It's reproduced. There's an image of it in Frederick Morton's book, A Nervous Splendour. But what there are no details of how he died. So the assumption that most people make is he has had a stroke or a heart attack, a freak accident or something. Who knows?
Throttled by the Kaiser.
Yeah, exactly. He's died of apoplexy after the Kaiser has been rude about an Austrian army belt or something of that kind, surely.
It'd be the obvious explanation, wouldn't it?
But not. It's the following evening, the Wiener Tagblatt prints the headline, "The Most Horrible Truth." And it says Crown Prince Rudolf was killed by a gunshot and he fired the pistol himself.
I mean, I can't imagine, because it's still a very devoutly Catholic,
of course,
city and country.
Yeah.
I mean, the impact must be devastating.
Exactly. I mean, we said it's the royal scandal to end all royal scandals. I mean, let's try to imagine. I mean, it's not even Prince Harry. It would be, implausibly, your fellow Aston Villa supporter, Prince William.
Prince William, yeah.
Carrying on with a 17-year-old and having a murder-suicide pact at a hunting lodge in Staines.
I think it's much worse than that, because suicide is no longer framed as a sin.
No, it's true. Yeah.
It's treated with sympathy and kind of understanding now. But back then, it was a sin. I mean, it endangers your mortal soul. And the Habsburgs, it's important to their legitimacy that they are Catholic.
Completely. They're the guardians of Catholicism.
Yeah.
They are the absolute, His Apostolic Majesty, Franz Joseph. It's so important for them as kings of Hungary and as emperors of Austria. Absolutely. So let's actually focus on the imperial family for a second. By the way, one small detail, actually, which I forgot to mention. Mary Vetsera's name has never been mentioned in any of those newspaper reports at all, and we'll come back to her role in the story in a second. So Franz Joseph spent the first afternoon trying to console his wife, along with Katharina Schratt. And then, being Franz Joseph, he went back to work, and he worked late that night, and he rang by 10 o'clock that night. On the day he heard the news about his son, he was still ringing the Hungarian Prime Minister to talk about the army bill. The next day, he got up at 4 o'clock as usual to start work. But at dawn, he had a visitor, the imperial doctor, Professor Hermann Wiederhofer, who had been to Mayerling and it was the first person who basically went into the room to inspect the bodies. And Professor Wiederhofer says, I have, some pretty bad news. It is clear that the Crown Prince died by his own hand, a gunshot wound to the head. But what is worse, there is no doubt that he killed Mary Vetsera with the same gun 2 hours earlier. So actually, this is so interesting. He had killed Mary Vetsera before he appeared at the manservant's bedside to say, get my breakfast ready.
To ask for breakfast.
Yeah.
So what do you think was going on there?
Don't know. Did he ever plan to eat the breakfast? Change his mind? Impossible to say. Strange.
I mean, everything about this is strange. Let's not deny that.
No. But there's the worst of it, I think, for Franz Joseph is what Wiederhofer then says. The Crown Prince has left a number of letters. So he's left a letter to his mother, Cece. This is the only letter that was written at the scene of the crime. The other letters were written beforehand. He wrote to his mother, I have no right to go on living. I have killed. And he asks that he and Mary are buried together at the nearby abbey of Heiligenkreuz, Holy Cross. He wrote a letter to his sister Valerie beforehand. He said, I advise you, I'm going now. I advise you when our father dies, leave Austria. For what will happen then in Austria is unforeseeable. This is again his kind of existential apocalyptic dread about the geopolitical outlook for his country.
And a shrewd analysis.
Yeah, I guess so. He wrote a letter to Stephanie, his wife. Dear Stephanie, you are now rid of my presence and annoyance. Be happy in your own way. Take care of the poor little one. She is all that is left of me. He wrote a letter to Loschek, his valet. Thank you for all the years of service. He also wrote letters to his friend, Baron Moritz Hirsch, and to his mistress, Mitzi Kaspar. But the contents of those letters is unknown, has never been released. And for his father, the Emperor, there was no letter at all. Nothing.
Oh, dear.
And that is the moment when the doctor says that to Franz Joseph. That's the moment when Franz Joseph loses his composure and he breaks down in tears and he collapses and falls to the ground. And you can absolutely understand why. For a father, that would be...
Of course. Devastating.
That would be almost the worst blow of all, I think.
Such kind of posthumous cruelty as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So eventually he composes himself and he says, where is my son? And Dr. Wiederhofer said, well, we've brought the body back to the palace as you ordered. We've dressed him in a uniform. We've bandaged his head and we put him in bed. And Franz Joseph went to his son's bedroom and he stood by his son's body for 15 minutes in silence, kind of vigil for a brother officer, as per the army regulations, always the way with him. And then he said to his aides, well, we have two priorities now. Number one, my son must have a Catholic burial. The Habsburgs have Catholic burials, Catholic funerals, even though he is both a murderer and a suicide. And then secondly, he said, all mention of this girl must be suppressed. Her presence at the scene, her body, even her name must be deleted from the public record. Now, what made this difficult is that the Habsburgs themselves have told the Vetsera family what happened to Mary. Cece herself broke the news to Mary's mother. Now, at the time, the imperial staff said to Mary's mother, Baroness Ellen Vetsera, they said, you have to get out of Vienna. The press will be hounding you. There'll be crowds baying for your blood. People will blame your daughter for this and you have to get out. And she got on a train to Italy, but then she changed her mind halfway and she came back to the city and she found that the city police had cordoned off her townhouse, her mansion, because there were crowds outside. She was in a terrible state. She wanted to go into the house. And eventually the Austrian Prime Minister, Count Taffer, turned up. He was very, I think we described him in the last episode, he's very suave, kind of top hat, cigar. And he sort of said, my dear lady, what a terrible business this is for you. I really do think you should get out of the city and you should keep a very low profile. It's now clear, by the way, that this was a genuine suicide pact because Mary's mother is now given a letter by Mary. Forgive me for what I have done. I could not resist love. In agreement with him, I wish to be buried by his side at the Alland churchyard. It's actually a slightly different place from the Heiligenkreuz Abbey, but there you go. I'm happier in death than I was in life. I mean, imagine what that must be like for a mother to read from her daughter. Of course, there's a big issue here for the families now. If Mary and Rudolf are suicides, they cannot be buried in consecrated ground. The emperor, however, gets in touch with Heiligenkreuz Abbey and his staff do anyway, and they say, basically, we want you to find room for Mary Vetsera's body. No questions asked. You must find her a plot. And that same day, Thursday, the 31st of January, two of her uncles, the Baltazzi brothers, went to Mayerling. They identified her body. A doctor washed the blood off her body and they dressed it in coat and hat, in a sort of veil, a boa, shoes. Remember, she's very fashionable. And then an absolutely bizarre scene. Mary's uncles propped her up and walked her out of the hunting lodge as if she was alive and put her in the carriage and sat either side of her. So if anybody's seen the film Weekend at Bernie's, that's what this is. And they even stuck a broomstick up the back of her dress so that it would keep her upright.
Because there are all kinds of stories where Sherlock Holmes turns up.
Yes.
And solves the case, aren't there? I don't think he'd have been fooled by that.
No, he wouldn't. I mean, this is so Sherlock Holmes, isn't it? It's sort of Scandal in Bohemia.
Yeah.
You know, all of that. So the carriage rolled through the night to Heiligenkreuz Abbey, which is about 3 miles away. There are loads of police waiting. And early the next morning, when the rain stopped a little bit, they buried Mary. And then the police sent a coded telegram to Vienna just with the words, all finished. And that was the end, in every way, of Mary Vetsera. There was one mention of her in an illustrated paper published in Graz, which said, quite erroneously, Mary Vetsera died in Venice and has been buried in Bohemia. But otherwise, to quote Frederick Morton, her name never appeared again in any book, magazine, or newspaper published in Austria-Hungary. No printed mention was ever made of her death or even her life. It was as though nobody remembered that she had walked the earth.
So that is a contrast with Diana in the 90s.
Yeah.
Because nobody was going to leave the details of that alone. And in fact, they came up with all kinds of linked conspiracies to explain it. But I'm wondering, what about the foreign press?
We'll come on to that in just a sec, but you're absolutely right. Of course, the foreign press does print it. And a problem for the Austro-Hungarian monarchy is there's an extremely large country to their north that prints everything in German so people can read it. And it's very easy for people to travel between Germany and Austria-Hungary with German newspapers. So they're fooling nobody. I mean, everybody knows about it. You know, they don't fool anybody. Meanwhile, what about Crown Prince Rudolf? Well, they held an autopsy the same day, the 31st. And the autopsy concluded that on studying Rudolf's brain, it was clear he was suffering from abnormal mental conditions and was in a state of mental confusion. And the Catholic Church said, oh, well, in that case, you know, he's not really a suicide then, is he? Or even a murderer. He was, poor fellow. What a terrible shame. He can be buried on the Capuchin crypt in Vienna alongside his ancestors. And this apparently was quite common. Vienna, you know, coroners or whatever, were well known for fudging reports on suicides to allow people to be buried according to the rites of the church.
I think, though, it's very unusual for a case that is this high profile. So the papal nuncio in Vienna, he's absolutely, and he says it's probably the first time that a papal nuncio had ever been obliged to attend the funeral of a murderer and a suicide.
Yeah, that's right.
So he's not happy about it at all.
And the papal nuncio actually then went to the hunting lodge and asked a load of questions, kept kind of looking into it.
So he could team up with Bratfish.
Exactly.
Set up an agency if the papal nuncioing doesn't work out.
Brilliant. So anyway, Rudolf lies in state for 3 days in various places in the Hofburg, and finally in the Hofburg Chapel, the Hofburg Kapelle. And there was a huge public crush. All thousands upon thousands of people, especially women, dressed in black. So many that people were injured or fainted in the crowd. Ambulances had to be called, and it ended with thousands of people being turned away. And then the funeral took place on Tuesday, the 5th of February in the Capuchin Church, in the Capuchin Crypt, which you can visit. I mean, you can see Crown Prince Rudolf's tomb. I went to see it last summer. Of course, this is not the last, you know, very high-profile funeral there's going to be in Vienna. And not for the last time, Franz Joseph specifically asks foreign dignitaries not to come. And in a preview of what will happen in 1914, the last person that you would ever want at a somber family occasion, the Kaiser, says, no, I'm coming anyway. And Franz Joseph has to send him a special message. You may judge how deeply crushed my family is if we have to address this request, even to you.
Even to you.
Even to you. If you'd suffered a terrible tragedy, and then Kaiser Wilhelm II announced that he was going to turn up, I mean, that would be the worst.
Yeah.
So the funeral was another incredibly sort of Viennese occasion. The ritual would be that the chamberlain would knock on the door of the Capuchin crypt, and the voice would say, "Who is it?" And he'd say, His Most Serene Imperial and Royal Highness, the Archduke Crown Prince Rudolf of Habsburg. And the voice would say, we know him not. And they'd repeat this. And then eventually, when the voice said, who is there? The Chamberlain would say, your brother Rudolf, a poor sinner. And then at last, they would open the door and let him in. And then right at the end, very memorable moment when they carried the body down to the crypt, Franz Joseph, the Emperor, that's the one moment in public. One of the only moments in his entire life, probably the only moment, when he lost control of his public dignity. And he burst out crying and he broke down and he was kissing the casket and sobbing. The one moment when you see the man, the grieving father, behind the facade of the sort of the imperial walrus.
Yeah.
So if we widen the picture out a bit, at one level, it's only a royal scandal. But the great sort of Austrian music critic, the most forbidding critic in Vienna at the day, was a guy called Eduard Hanslick. And he wrote afterwards, he said, I've lived through the saddest catastrophes in Vienna. I've lived through revolutions, the loss of land, murderous devastations by flood and fire, but nothing of all this is comparable to the horror of January the 30th. The disconsolate, desperate turbulence which ripped through the entire population is indescribable. And we know from, you mentioned Diana a few times, how these sort of personal tragedies can often cut through with the great mass of the population in a way that geopolitical things don't.
Yeah. I mean, you said that Diana's world wasn't Gothic. It was Hello Magazine and everything.
Yeah.
And so it seemed expressive of a kind of age of celebrity that was running out of control. But presumably in the Viennese context, there are all kinds of cultural swirls that find echoes in this case. And also there is the sense that the Crown Prince has gone. The Emperor doesn't have another direct male heir. And it must have symbolized for people at the time in the Empire an anxiety that indeed the storm clouds are gathering, don't you think?
Yes, I think exactly both those things. I think, first of all, it's a huge shock for the dynasty because, as you say, he doesn't have another son. So they're going to have to search elsewhere in the family tree for an heir. Of course, the man that they find turns out to be a great friend of the rest is history, but a slightly ill-fated figure in his own right, although the bird population of Central Europe might not agree. And I think you're dead right. The cultural atmosphere of Van der Slecht Vienna, the sense of neurosis, the sense of introspection, of cultural anxiety, also cultural excitement, of course. This seems reflective of that world.
And also of the German-speaking world more generally, because Wagner is, the Liebestod, the idea of love and death, and two lovers who are united in death.
Yeah, Tristan and Isolde. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's probably the most celebrated work of music that has been produced in the late 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen how much a part it is of the kind of cultural furniture of people of this age. It must just be overwhelming.
Completely. And precisely because it's so overwhelming, that's why you get the conspiracy theories. So we talked about this with the Kennedy assassination, with lots of things. What appears to be a freak event, if it's seen by the public as cataclysmic and of seismic importance, people will often refuse to accept. They don't like chance, luck, personal quirks in history. Great events must have great causes. And so people look for conspiracy theories that are related to the political anxieties of the day. So people say, first of all, there are the sort of more humdrum conspiracy theories. Mary murdered Rudolf, or her relatives murdered Rudolf, perhaps because they found out he'd given her gonorrhea and they wanted to punish him for it.
What about Stephanie?
Yeah, there are theories that Crown Princess Stephanie did it because she was jealous, of course. The Freemasons, the Jesuits, the Jews, Bismarck did it.
Not the Kaiser.
The Kaiser, no, there are theories that the Kaiser did it. But the most common, and this obviously reflects the political atmosphere of the day, this is such a weird theory. He either killed himself or was murdered because he was about to be exposed as having plotted to seize the throne of Hungary from his father and break away from his father and set up a secessionist Hungarian kingdom.
Well, I guess that's expressive of what is clearly a deep sense of tension between father and son.
But also between the two halves of the empire.
Yeah. And he's, the emperor is obsessing about this even on the day of his son's suicide.
Right.
Isn't there a theory that was proposed by Empress Zita, who was the last empress, that it was the French and that it had been organized by Clemenceau, which I think is generally not regarded as plausible.
Why did Clemenceau do it? Remind me why Clemenceau wanted to kill Crown Prince Rudolf?
Well, he wasn't even, I think, he wasn't even in Parliament at this time. I think she made it up, but she lived to a kind of ripe old age. I think she kind of died in the 70s or something.
She did, yeah.
Maybe even the 80s. And she was kept repeating this.
I have to admit, I showed Herculean self-control by not falling down lots of rabbit holes online, because there's so much stuff online about this by people, because people love Sisi and they love Crown Prince Rudolf. So if you go to the Capuchin crypt, they have tombs of all the Habsburgs. And some of these are like massive figures. I don't know, Maria Theresa or something. But Crown Prince Rudolf's tomb has more flowers, has a lot of flowers. Given that he never wielded power, and actually, in the grand scheme of things, you could argue was not a terribly consequential person. But there's clearly something about his story that speaks to people, even today in the 21st century.
It's kind of Kurt Cobain of Austro-Hungary.
I mean, to talk about the political meaning of it, any historian writing about the Austro-Hungarian Empire or the Habsburgs, gives this a lot of welly, understandably. And they see it as symptomatic of this wider loss of confidence of the imperial project.
It's the Titanic.
Yeah. But as with the Titanic, I think a lot of this is massively overblown. So we know why Mary and Rudolf killed themselves. He's morbid. He's got gonorrhea. Today, he would be diagnosed as having mental health issues of a very serious kind.
That does speak of something that is genuine, which is the way in which to be born into the Habsburg dynasty is to feel trapped, is to feel a prisoner. We have all these counts of both men and women almost sewing themselves into their uniforms and their clothing. So, Franz Ferdinand, when he gets shot, it takes time for them to realize that the blood is welling out. We're going to hear something similar about Sisi in due course, I think. That monarchy is a kind of trap for those who find themselves enclosed within it.
Very 21st century theme, right? And people often say that about the House of Windsor, don't they?
Yeah, but the difference with the House of Windsor is that they can kind of make radio programs about it and kind of have features in newspapers talking about bad mental health, whereas Rudolf couldn't. And the idea of any of these people really having a kind of interior emotional life is verboten.
Yeah. Interesting that nobody had done this before him, though, no? What does that tell you? Something changed in the second half of the 19th century that made this possible. That would not, it's hard to imagine a 14th century prince.
No, and it's changing nowhere more than in Vienna.
Yeah, exactly.
Vienna is this is where all these ideas of repression and neurosis and psychosis and everything are being defined at this very moment.
Maybe a particular kind of introspection and a sense of yourself, or I don't know.
He's vibe lording, I believe is the phrase.
It's vibe lording. Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Gen Z joins us on the podcast. Brilliant. So what happened next? Franz Joseph, this is very Freudian, and Frederick Morton makes this point in his book. He wants to erase every trace, every memory of this incident. And the way he does it is by literally erasing the place. So the hunting lodge at Mayerling, every trace of it is expunged from the earth. It's completely pulled down, and it is replaced with a Carmelite convent, which stands to this day, and the nuns of the convent are enjoined to offer daily prayers for the salvation of the late Crown Prince.
Well, he needs all the prayers he can get.
He does. So the most likely heir to Franz Joseph now is his younger brother, Karl Ludwig, who is in his late 50s. But Karl Ludwig's not in brilliant health. And in the late 1890s, in 1896, he went on a sort of pilgrimage to Palestine, then part of the Ottoman Empire. And he decided to drink some water from the River Jordan. He basically drank dirty water polluted with sewage.
So do we get his dysentery returned to the show?
Dysentery returned to the show and carried off Karl Ludwig. And the heir became his son, Rudolf's protege, Franz Ferdinand. So a great friend of the rest is history, but we know what became of him. And actually, this brings us to the wider issue of tragedy in the Habsburgs. So you've already alluded to this. In the decade after Rudolf's death, his mother Sisi cut an ever lonelier and more melancholy figure. So she's dressed always in black in mourning for her son. She drifts around the Mediterranean. She's thinner than ever. She looks very sad, solitary. And in autumn of 1898, she was staying at Lake Geneva. And Franz Joseph, her husband, was still writing to her all the time from Vienna. And he would write her these very sweet letters. At the end of one letter, he signs off. He says, sort of, farewell, my most beautiful, my best and sweetest angel. But the sad thing is she never got to read this particular letter, because while it was en route, on the 10th of September, 1898, she was boarding the steamer to Montreux on Lake Geneva, which just had one lady in waiting with her. And she was standing amid the crush of people when suddenly she collapsed, and no one could work out why she collapsed at first. As you said, she's very tightly, sewn into her corset.
Yeah.
And when finally they worked out what happened, they realized that she had been stabbed through the heart with a sharpened stiletto, a kind of improvised stiletto, by an Italian anarchist called Luigi Lucchini. And he had traveled to Geneva to kill a royal, because it was a favorite royal hangout. And he said afterwards he didn't care which one he killed as long as he killed one. And Sisi was the person that he killed. And when the news got back to Vienna, Franz Joseph, apparently when he heard the news, he sobbed uncontrollably. And then he said to one of his aides, "So I am to be spared nothing in this world. Nobody knows the love we had for each other," which is a sort of bitterly ironic thing for him to say.
Yeah.
So this for him was the crowning blow. He still had his actress, Katharina Schratt, though their relationship had actually cooled by this point. He's very lonely. He writes to Katharina Schratt at one point, "I feel endlessly sad in my hopeless loneliness." His son has killed himself. His wife has been murdered. He's effectively on his own, and he lives for another 18 years after his wife's death. He seems incredibly old at this point. He actually looks older than he is. So he turned 70 in 1900, but at this point he looked about 150. And people talked about him as a relic at this point. They would call him the last knight or the old gentleman or something. And he remains enormously popular, Franz Joseph, a great rallying point for his empire. And his suffering actually worked quite well as a political asset, because the papers would call him the man of sorrows, sort of a man who has lost everything. Wife, son, all the light has gone from his life, and yet still he dedicates himself every day, gets up at 4:00 in the morning.
His red boxes.
To the peoples of his empire. But I suppose another way of looking at it is precisely because he is such a relic, he seems like the embodiment of an antiquated institutional conservatism, an empire that seems utterly beleaguered by the modern world, and an empire that feels itself to be so embattled. And of course, that's the context in which his heir, who he doesn't get on with at all now, Franz Ferdinand, goes off to Bosnia to see some army maneuvers in 1914. And Tom, we all know how that story was to end.
We do. Well, thank you, Dominic. A Gothic chiller, an amazing story. And we have a bonus out this week on the nephew of one of the characters in this series, and that is Baron Nopscher, Sisi's chamberlain. And his nephew is also Franz Baron Nopscher, and he is one of the most remarkable figures in the entire history of paleontology. I see Dominic's face light up at the mention of that word. So Nopscher Jr., absolutely titanic figure in the history of the study of dinosaurs. But he also he hung out with bandits in Albania, became a spy in the First World War, is in the Guinness Book of Records as the first man to have hijacked a plane, and his end has some striking, and actually I wonder if they're entirely coincidental, echoes of the Mayerling Incident. Ooh. So if you're already a member of the Rest is History Club, you already have had that. If you're not, then you can sign up at therestishistory.com.
That sounds amazing.
And the good news doesn't stop there, because, Dominic, we're also doing a live show, aren't we, about the ultimate Victorian adventure, which is the Abyssinian expedition of 1868, all kicked off when the Abyssinian emperor wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, and she neglected to reply, and he got in a massive strop, and chaos ensued. And actually, I think that ends with him, with the Abyssinian emperor killing himself. So, bit of a theme developing there.
Yeah, it's absolutely an amazing story. It's one of the most lurid, implausible, and entertaining of all 19th century imperial adventures. So I'm really looking forward to the show.
It's very Flashman, isn't it?
There's a Flashman book about it. Flashman on the March.
Yeah, it's the ideal Flashman story if you like Flashman. And even if you don't, it's still brilliant. Anyway, that is at the South Bank in London on Friday the 4th of September. And you can get tickets once again at therestishistory.com. I think you should just bookmark therestishistory.com and buy everything it's got to offer. And Dominic, I have even more exciting news because we are running a summer sale. And so for a limited time, if you want to sign up to the Rest of History Club, listen about the dinosaurs and a host of other supplementary benefits, then you will get an extra 20% off an annual membership using the code SUMMER26. And this is only valid until the 31st of August. So hurry, hurry, hurry while stocks last. So that is the Mayerling Incident. Next week, we begin a 6-part series on another royal, but this is a royal who lives to a ripe old age and does heroic things all her reign, and it is Elisabeth I. And we will be looking at the road that takes Elisabeth I to the fateful decision to execute Mary Queen of Scots and thereby inspire the launching of the Spanish Armada against her.
Francis Drake's in it, isn't he?
Francis Drake is in it.
Sir Philip Sidney.
Sir Philip Sidney's in it. Edward Campion, the Jesuit, is in it. Lord Cecil is in it. It's just non-stop Elizabethan action.
Brilliant.
So if you love a Tudor, you're going to love this series. We will see you then. Bye-bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.